Chapter 501. The entrance to the tomb was near the bottom of the valley. A few broken pillars stood in the thick bushes, covered with vines. If one did not look closely, they would have thought that they were made of green rocks. However, Brando thought that the mercenaries had dug a very professional tunnel. He used to dig this kind of tunnel before. After all, it was the physical work of a warrior, and he was good at it. He observed for a while and found that the stone of the pillars was badly corroded. The small patterns on the pillars were similar to words. They were not written in the Crew's language, nor were they written in the Elven language. In other words, they probably came from the history of the mountain people. Before the Silver Elf Empire and the Kingdom of Erwin ruled over this area, the original inhabitants of this area were the mountain people. The history of this place could be traced back to before the War of the Holy Saints. This tomb probably had a long history. It was a pity that he did not invest much in history. His scholar level was mostly in heraldry and aristocratic knowledge. He used to disguise himself as a nobleman, but now he thought that it was not worth it. The wizards under Lyrian's command had already created a magic ball of light. The group entered the tomb. The air in the tomb had been expelled for a long time, but the smell of decay still lingered in the air. The light was a little dim. They followed the dim light into a tomb cellar. Rows of side niches appeared on both sides of the passage. They were filled with skeletons and remains, some of which had been destroyed. Brando found the card in his hand in one of these niches. He sensed for a while and found nothing. However, the faint smell of magic in front of him made his heart beat faster. The Shire walked side by side with him. Scarlet and Yuta walked on his left and right respectively. The female mercenary leader gripped her long sword tightly. Her emerald green eyes seemed to be burning under the light of magic. Scarlet gripped the spear in her hand tightly. Through her amber eyes, the girl quietly monitored the movements in the darkness. The smell of decay grew stronger and stronger, gradually making people uneasy. Roman grabbed his hand tightly, but his eyes were sparkling with excitement as he looked around. The sand in the tomb had been dug up. Soon, there was light in front of them. Brando walked closer and saw that it was an agate light barrier. Lines of runes flashed on it. It was thick in the middle and thin on both sides. It was obviously some kind of magic barrier. Is this the magic barrier? He turned around and asked. That's right, my lord. We've tried all sorts of methods, but we're still unable to remove this barrier. Schiller hurriedly replied. This spell was Chaos Crystal Wall, a level 6 law spell. The caster was at least a level 40 law wizard. It would be strange if Lilien's apprentices and warlocks could break it apart. Can you open it? Brando turned to ask the Shire. Simple, the Shire replied casually. Now. Brando nodded. The young wizard's servant began to chant. He reached out his hand and gently touched the magic wall. With his finger as the center, a black hole appeared on the agate light barrier. The area of the black hole quickly expanded, and in an instant, the entire magic barrier disappeared. The tomb was silent for a moment. Easy. He should only be a 6th ring wizard, the Shire replied. He was a 7th ring wizard. 1 ring was enough to make a world of difference. This spell doesn't look like a defense. It looks more like a seal, Brando said. Why? The Shire did not understand. Because the Chaos Crystal Wall is a very strong defensive spell. It's more like a barrier that prevents foreign objects from entering. If it's a defensive mechanism, it's at least a little offensive. The Shire of course did not know that Brando had seen many defensive spells set up in the underground city. You even know about this spell, my lord? Of course. I'm a Highland Knight, Brando replied nonchalantly. It was the Shire's turn to feel uncomfortable. He clearly knew that the person standing in front of him was not a Highland wizard. But the people around him did not doubt it. Other than a Highland knight, who would bring a wizard servant through the streets and be so knowledgeable about mysterious magic? After breaking the magic barrier, Brando continued to lead the group forward. This time, he was much more cautious. Seals and defenses were different. Defenses were dangerous, but seals meant that there were unknown dangers in the tomb. Seals were more or less mysterious. In the whole of Erewhon, there were not many places that were used to suppress evil spirits. The most famous one was the underground public tomb in Ampere Seal. Another tomb. Brando felt that today was really strange. Behind the curtain of light was a huge tomb. Under the pale light, more than 10 stone pillars stood quietly in the dark and quiet hall. They were already covered with cobwebs. In this dusty world, in addition to the densely packed niches on the sides, there were many stone coffins in the middle of the hall. According to the barbarian customs, these should be the sacrificial lambs of a higher status. Brando used detection magic to check the whole hall. There were 3 or 4 flashing lights in the corner, but none of them were cards of fate. Flies were still meat, and there were also good things in low-level underground cities. He pointed out the location, and the Magi immediately began to search the room. But someone seemed to have touched something, and there was a sudden creaking sound in the silent hall. Brendel quickly saw a few dark figures pushing open the coffin lids and climbing out from within. "It's tomb ghouls!" The Magi's apprentices shouted with pale faces. Tomb ghouls were a mutation of ghouls. They were level 27 undead creatures, and their strength was infinitely close to the peak of black iron. Moreover, the humanoid creatures they killed would become undead creatures in a very short time. For adventurers, they were definitely one of the most dangerous creatures in the underground city. Brando looked at the Magi's apprentices in front of him, who were in a panic because of the shock, and could not help but think of his first adventure. Because the scene in the underground city was too realistic, a few of his friends and a giant demon were scared witless and ran away. Thinking of the past, he could not help but laugh. On the other hand, the Shire only felt embarrassed when he saw this scene. These Magi's apprentices were all his subordinates, and if his subordinates were too embarrassed, he would be the one to lose face. What's with the chaos? He finally could not help but growl, "Are you all just waiting to die?" The Magi in front of him finally reacted. The tomb ghouls had already climbed up the nearest stone pillar to the ceiling. The wooden beams above crisscrossed, and it was pitch black. It was impossible to see where these monsters were hiding. One of the Magi first put up a wizard's wall, and then the hall was filled with a large shield, stone armor, water shield, and light wall. "Put the magic balls up there," Leiron immediately ordered. Several balls of light immediately flew to the top of the ceiling. The tomb ghouls usually liked to hide in the dark and launch sudden attacks, but this time they had nowhere to hide. Their hunched bodies were immediately exposed to the light, and the monsters immediately let out a shrill squeak. 6, 7, 8, there are 8 of them. The Magi began to cast spells, but the tomb ghouls were the first to pounce on them. A few of them were knocked to the ground. Although the tomb ghouls' sharp teeth could not penetrate their shields, the scene was already filled with cries and screams. Scarlet stared at the monsters and threw the spear in her hand. It pierced through 3 tomb ghouls and nailed them to the wall on the other side. On the other side, Yura had also killed her way into the crowd. Her strength was close to that of a mid-level silver. She was not outstanding among Brando's subordinates, but she was more than enough to deal with these mere level 27 undead creatures. In an instant, several tomb ghouls that had grabbed onto the Shire's Magi had their heads pierced through by her sword. The remaining 2 tomb ghouls wanted to retreat into the depths of the tomb, but the Magi who had prepared their spells would not let them do as they wished. All kinds of lights flashed in the hall, and the 2 tomb ghouls were smashed into pieces by countless magic arrows, ice bolts, fire arrows, and lightning claws. The scene was so spectacular that even Brando was a little stunned. The Shire could only wipe the sweat off his forehead. The battle started quickly, but it also ended quickly. There were a few skeletons standing up from the side of the wall. If it was back in Gerald's tomb, Brando would have had a hard time dealing with these skeletons. But here, even the weakest of his mercenaries could easily dismantle them. After the battle, the Magi found a few magic amulets in the positions pointed out by Brando. They were all alchemy-grade trinkets. They should be used to ward off evil spirits. Brando didn't care about these things anymore, so he directly gave them to the Magi's apprentice Magi, causing a burst of cheers. The last item to be presented was a magic sword. Brando was slightly startled when he saw the magic sword. The body of the sword was crimson red and sparkling like agate. The guard of the sword was a pair of fire ravens, and the sword hilt was surrounded by flame patterns. At first glance, it was obvious that this was a rare treasure. He recognized this magic sword, Fire Raven's tongue. This was a brass-grade magic sword. The quality of the sword itself was not bad, and the rare thing about it was that it could shoot out a flaming whip. In the early stages of the game, it was considered a rare equipment. Brando saw that Yuta didn't have a suitable sword, so he simply gave it to the female mercenary group leader. "My lord." Yuta was slightly startled, but she was pleasantly surprised when she received the sword. In this era, low magic items were very common, but brass grade and above were the real treasures. She knew that Brando had the Halran Gaia, but this sword could also be given to a close subordinate. She didn't expect that Brando would give it to her without hesitation. She gently stroked the body of the sword. There was no swordsman who didn't love swords, let alone such a good sword. "Thank you, I will cherish it," Yuta said with a rare seriousness. But Brando didn't think so much. In his eyes, brass-grade equipment was just an ordinary magic item. He regarded Yuta as one of his own. Not to mention brass-grade equipment, if it was suitable, he wouldn't hesitate to give it to her even if it was silver-grade equipment. At this time, the wizard who was scouting ahead ran back and said breathlessly, My lord, there is a tomb in front." The Shire saw these embarrassing subordinates and simply turned his face away, pretending that he didn't see them. Of course, he thought that when he went back, it would be time to train these guys' abilities. He felt that he was too relaxed before. Tomb. Brando didn't care about the performance of these wizard apprentices. His own first adventure was even worse than this. Looking at these wizards, he felt a sense of familiarity as if he was looking at a newbie in the game. The Amber Sword was a very lively game, and rookies and newbies were always everywhere. Yes, tomb, there is no road behind. That's it. Brando couldn't help but be startled. He didn't expect the tomb to be so short, but after thinking about it, he understood. In the past, there were many small dungeons like this in the game. After all, this was a tomb, not a maze. Not every tomb was comparable to the public crypt under Ampere Seal. After all, the Amber Sword's first goal was authenticity. "What is the tomb like?" he asked again. "There is a big stone coffin inside," the wizard apprentice said, "and a lot of those cards." To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Calm to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 502. After passing through a hall full of cobwebs and dust, the tomb was located at the end of the underground city. Generally speaking, it was the place where the boss monster was. As soon as Brando entered the tomb, he instinctively felt that something was wrong. The tomb was very small, with a length and width of only a few dozen steps. The whole structure was square, and a huge sarcophagus quietly stopped in the middle of the room on a stone platform protruding from the ground. The architectural style of the tomb was the same as the tomb outside, but the atmosphere in the tomb was clearly oppressive. Under the dim light, the narrow space seemed to be filled with an evil aura. The air was condensed to the freezing point, and even the flames of the torches were suppressed out of thin air. This was the aura of the boss monster, but it was much stronger than Brando had expected. This was not the aura that a level 30 boss monster should have. However, Brando looked around and did not find the boss monster. He could only guess that the boss monster should be in the sarcophagus in the middle. He pulled out Halran Gaia and placed it flat to block the people behind him, indicating that they should not act rashly. Then he turned his head and asked, "Where are the cards?" "Over there, my lord." The sorcerer apprentice immediately pointed to the other side of the sarcophagus. Brando then noticed the remains of a skeleton lying in the shadows. Because the tomb was full of such skeletons, he did not notice this detail before. Now that he was reminded, he immediately noticed that the remains were different from the others. The people buried in this tomb should be slaves. Most of them did not wear any luxurious clothes. Even if they did, most of them would have been charred and turned into dust with the passage of time. However, the skeleton was wearing a robe that was intact, and there was a staff by its hand. Brando recognized at a glance that it was a sorcerer. Other than sorcerers, very few people would use a precious material like magic blackwood to make a staff. There were a few shining cards scattered around the skeleton. They were the cards of fate, and there were a total of 5 of them. It was not strange for a wizard to carry a card of fate, and this was not the first time he found one in a spellcaster's belongings. Wizards were a group of people who were full of curiosity and exploration towards all the mysterious things in this world. They would often collect strange little things that even they themselves couldn't recognize. Every year, many people would lose their lives because of this. At least Brando had heard of people who were cursed because they collected statues of evil gods. Therefore, it was not hard to understand why Magi would collect some mysterious cards. "Can I use some kind of spell to get it?" Brando asked. He instinctively felt that this tomb was somewhat dangerous. There were many kinds of commander-tier monsters. Some of them were very troublesome and knew how to set traps. Although there were only tomb ghouls outside, there was no guarantee that the owner of this tomb would not be a high-tier sudden death spirit. He did not want to enter the enemy's main battlefield and fight it. More importantly, this tomb gave him a very indescribable feeling. He had experienced the calamity of wolves. Even when faced with a tide of bearing beasts, he was not as nervous as he was now. The danger in the air seemed to condense into needles, piercing his heart. He had been in hundreds and thousands of dungeons and was very sensitive to danger. He instinctively felt that there was something strange about this tomb. Although from the outside entrance, this should be a level 30 enhanced dungeon. In theory, the boss should be a gold-tier commander-tier monster. But there was no guarantee that nothing would go wrong. No one could guarantee that they would not make a mistake. Especially after going deeper into the tomb, Brando found that the tomb's history was unbelievably long. If this tomb existed before the rule of Erwin and the Silver Elves, then it had at least been around for thousands of years. For things like tombs and dungeons, the longer the history, the stranger the monsters inside. The Amber Sword was very realistic in this aspect. Brando had to be careful. He trusted his own judgment and experience. The apprentices shook their heads in unison. "We've tried, my lord," one of them mustered up the courage to answer, "but the sarcophagus seems to have some power that can dispel our magic. As soon as our magic gets close to the sarcophagus, it immediately disappears." "Disappears?" Brando asked, "Is it dispelled?" "No, we don't feel that our magic has been dispelled. Rather than saying, it's more like we've been cut off." An apprentice replied. "Blocking mental power, it should be a psionic ability." Brando immediately concluded that psionic magic was the most famous, followed by holy words and witchcraft. In the Amber Sword, the ghosts were famous for creating illusions using their psychic powers. They could distort people's minds and magnify their fear by 1,000 times. When you felt their cold fingertips pass through your chest, you would have already turned into ice. It wasn't because of the cold, but because your heart had fallen into eternal darkness. Therefore, the sarcophagus might really be the Spirit Lord. So Brando thought for a moment and took out the white deer statue from his pocket. Everyone saw a white deer emitting a fluorescent light appear in the tomb. The accompanying mercenaries were shocked at first, but when they realized that it was their Lord's summoned creature, they were relieved. But when they looked at Brando, their eyes were inexplicably filled with awe. The white deer was a holy spirit in Aween's legends, and those who were blessed by the white deer would often become heroes in the legends. This kind of saying was especially popular among the people in the south, because there would occasionally be people who would witness the white deer in the forest. After the white deer appeared, it retreated slightly and uneasily dug its hooves into the ground. Its behavior made Brando frown. The white deer holy spirit was the nemesis of all evil creatures. The leader of the monsters in the sarcophagus actually made it feel uneasy. Brando immediately became alert. All the details proved that his initial intuition was not wrong. There was definitely something strange about this tomb. He could not help but look at the Shire. When they were breaking the seal on the outside, the two of them had already noticed that something was wrong. Do you want us to go and get those things, my lord? The wizard apprentice at the side observed Brando's expression and asked with some trepidation. Anyone could see that there was something strange about this tomb. No one knew what kind of danger they would encounter if they went in. Adventuring in underground tombs was originally an extremely dangerous thing. Terrifying evil creatures and fatal curses had taken the lives of countless adventurers. However, Brando's reputation in ABEs was unparalleled. If he gave an order, most of the wizards and adventurers present would blindly trust him. But Brando shook his head. Although he was now the lord of a territory, and in name, or perhaps in the eyes of the northern princess, he was considered an outstanding noble. If Amandina was here, she would definitely warn him that it was not the right thing to do to put himself in danger. But in essence, he was still a simple-minded player and a simple youth from the countryside of Braggs. No matter what the excuse was, sending people to die in a trap was not something a normal player would do to an intelligent and thoughtful NPC. Besides, if it was so easy to take out the spoils of war, then this sarcophagus would not be here. At present, it seemed that only by killing the boss in the sarcophagus would they have a chance to get the treasure here. This was the most basic setting of a game. Although Wond was no longer a game, it was still born out of the Amber Sword. At least until now, Brando did not see that this world was too different from the original world. All of you, back off. This is not a battle you can participate in. He turned around and pointed his sword at the others and gave the order. At the same time, he gave the Shire a look, indicating that the two of them should approach from the left and right. He decided to open the sarcophagus first to see what the monster was. But this order made everyone present stunned. They had never seen a lord who would go first when faced with danger. Of course, most of them felt strange. Brando's actions were somewhat out of place in the traditional view of this world. Or to put it bluntly, he did not seem like a lord or a noble. But no one talked about it. There was only silence. At least everyone could understand the benevolence and righteousness contained in this order. Although everyone understood that in the struggle between nobles, only those with a heart as hard as iron could really reach the top. But in fact, no one wanted to follow a person who was cold-blooded and ruthless to the people around him. The young mage Lyrian saw this scene and could not help but hold his breath. He was born into a noble family. In his impression, his father was a small noble who was busy making friends all day long. He had also seen those shrewd and serious nobles. But the Brando he knew was completely different from all the nobles he had seen. In fact, the mercenaries around him, and even the wizards, did not doubt that Brando was a real noble. Yes, because the Lord was knowledgeable and knew almost everything. Only nobles could have such a deep family knowledge. But in Lyrian's opinion, it was not so. With his attentiveness and sharpness, it was not difficult for him to find a side of Brando that did not fit in with the nobles. That was why he once suspected that Brando was not a noble. Of course, this suspicion could not explain Brando's knowledge and calm attitude, nor could it shake his loyalty to this lord. But it always made him puzzled. But until now, he was sure. Ever since Brando turned around and pointed his sword at them and gave the order, he suddenly saw the brilliance of a true noble from the sword. It was not a temperament that the nobles of today's Erewhon could have. It was the demeanor of the ancient nobles. The king and the nobles' swords always walked in front of their people. They held the flag high and led their ancestors to cut through the thorns in the darkness, walking on a path to order and light. In the darkness, the blood of the nobles flowed. That was the path of the ancient sages. Lyrian looked at the backs of Brando and the Shire and could not help but take a step forward. But at this time, Brando and the Shire had already placed their hands on the sarcophagus, one on the left and one on the right. At this time, the temperature in the tomb suddenly dropped. Everyone could feel a layer of frost growing on the walls of the tomb at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, there was a thick layer of snow. In just a moment, everyone's teeth started to chatter. Damn it, what the hell is this? Brendel's strange yell shattered the noble image that he had built up in Lyrian's mind. His noble demeanor vanished like a puff of smoke, and he returned to being the lord who made a fuss over nothing. Of course, Lyrian did not know that this image was called a player, and he would never know. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Calm to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 503. When Brando and the Shire got close to the sarcophagus, a chill came from the sarcophagus. This chill was completely different from the chill of nature that he had experienced in the mountain area of Alkash. An evil thought went straight to the bottom of his heart, making his hair stand on end. What the hell is this? Brando was shocked and immediately felt an evil thought enter his spiritual world. Mortal, submit to me. A majestic and heavy voice sounded from the bottom of his heart, like thunder rolling from the sky, with boundless pressure. Not good, mind control. Brando was alarmed. Mind control spells were an extremely evil type of dark witchcraft. By erasing the soul and memory, they could turn individuals with free will into slaves of the spellcaster. This type of spell completely despised the dignity of life itself. As early as 700 years ago, it was explicitly forbidden to study and use. Nowadays, only a few cultists and a few necromancers would secretly study it, but Brando never dreamed that there would be a cultist or a necromancer lying in the sarcophagus. Even as early as 1,000 years ago, necromancers and cultists did not dare to openly build a mausoleum for themselves, not to mention that necromancers mostly pursued immortality. Among the countless necromancers who had fallen over the centuries, more than half of them had died unnatural deaths. Necromancers also did not believe that souls could rest in peace on the earth. Crawl, tremble, weep helplessly for your sins, and accept the boundless anger between heaven and earth. The thunder-like voice screamed. Brando had already calmed down. The heavy pressure in the spiritual world had formed an endless giant in front of him. He looked up and found that he and the giant were standing on a boundless, pitch-black plain. The giant raised its hand and pressed down on him like a mountain. For a moment, the wind and clouds changed color, as if the center of the world was only the five-finger mountain that was getting bigger and bigger. Get out of here. Brendel gritted his teeth and roared angrily. He knew that this was an illusion, but he could not help but break out in cold sweat as the giant hand came closer and closer. The feeling of reality was too strong, and even the wind pressure was suffocating him. In theory, mind control spells were attacks on the mind. As long as the will was strong enough, the opponent could not do anything to him. He had a few similar experiences in the game, but unfortunately, there were no successful examples. the warrior's will was too weak. Almost every time he encountered such a situation, his vision would turn black and he would lose control of his body. When he woke up, he was already in the Resurrection Temple. This kind of unlucky experience was of no help to him at all, because there was no second chance in this world. Brendel's nerves were taut as he prepared himself for the next earth-shattering attack. He could not help but think to himself, I even managed to survive the calamity of wolves. Am I going to be defeated here? While he was thinking, the giant hand pressed down on his head. The mind attack was aimed directly at the soul, ignoring almost all external defense. The warrior's mind resistance was the weakest, so it should not be able to withstand a single blow. However, what Brando did not expect was that before the giant hand could touch even a strand of his hair, it seemed to have met with a huge resistance above his head. It actually shattered into pieces with a bang. He saw with his own eyes that the palm seemed to have hit something. A crack appeared from the center, and then a few long cracks crawled out. In the blink of an eye, the palm turned into countless pieces and disappeared. This is impossible. The thunderous voice stopped abruptly. After the giant's palm shattered, it turned into a gentle breeze and disappeared into thin air. Brendel clearly felt that the terrifying mental attack was like a gentle breeze that brushed across the surface of the water. It only caused a few ripples on his mental barrier. This. Brando was stunned. His first reaction was that the monster in the sarcophagus was strong in appearance but weak in reality. However, there was obviously a problem. To be able to cast such high-level dark magic, it had to be at least at the level of the Shire. No matter what, it should not be unable to break through the mental barrier of a warrior. In fact, this was no longer a problem of not being able to break through. It did not even cause the slightest bit of impact. To put it crudely, it did not even hurt a single strand of hair. It was as if you knew that your opponent was a terrifying boss. You tensed up and waited for the fatal blow, only to find that your opponent had turned into a harmless little bunny in the blink of an eye. This contrast was a little too big. What the hell was going on? While Brendel was still trying to figure out what was going on, a scream suddenly rang out from the endless darkness. Impossible. You can't be a human. How can a human have such strong willpower? What are you? At this moment, the loud voice in the sky actually had a hint of hoarseness, giving people the impression that it was a crazy woman who was pulling at her hair. Brando suddenly reacted. Willpower. Ha! He could not help but laugh loudly in his heart. He just remembered that his willpower attribute had been increased by 1,000 times due to Endesha injecting the blood of gods into his body. With his current willpower, this level of mental attack was simply showing off in front of an expert. If Endesha was still here, Brando felt that he would have hugged her and kissed her. This was simply too wonderful. However, he was also a little embarrassed. He had been a warrior in the game for too long, and he had gotten used to it. He did not think of this point and was almost frightened by this monster. However, he immediately sneered and looked up at the heavy dark clouds in the sky. Who asked you to control me? My willpower is in the hundreds, and I'm basically immune to spells below the 10th circle. Even if you find a completely reconstructed silver body wizard, they might not have such high willpower. However, the world he was in right now was clearly an illusion formed by the mental domain. The monster in the sarcophagus was quite bold, and it still did not retreat. Brando immediately gritted his teeth and released a mental attack towards the sky. Ah! A shrill scream suddenly came from the sky. Logically speaking, Brando had not undergone any special training, and it was impossible for him to release a mental attack. However, that was referring to the attack. In fact, this world was still Brando's inner world, and it was controlled by him. Therefore, Brando's attack could be said to be a self-defense and counterattack using his willpower. Originally, in a battle on the mental domain, the invader's willpower had to be able to completely suppress the target. The funny thing was that the monster did not realize that Brando's willpower was abnormally high. It was unable to react in time and suffered a great loss under Brando's attack. Ah! With a series of screams, the monster finally escaped from the illusion, and the boundless dark plane disappeared in an instant. Brando shuddered and woke up from his mental domain. At this time, he was almost soaked in cold sweat, but he immediately heard a concerned voice in his ear. "Brando, Brando, what's wrong?" It was Orthlis's voice. Orthlis and Brando's minds were connected, and she immediately sensed that something was wrong with Brando. However, as soon as she spoke, Brando's eyes had already cleared up. The battle in the mental domain seemed fierce, but in reality, only a moment had passed. "There's a monster in the sarcophagus, and I almost fell into its trap." A mental attack. Orthlis quickly reacted and asked with a serious face. "Yeah. Are you okay?" "I'm fine." Brando felt a little tired and exhausted, but he shook his head to show that he was fine. He believed that the monster in the sarcophagus was in a worse state than him. His willpower was more than 100 points, and it was no different from a nuclear weapon for a level 30 to 40 mental attack. He believed that even if the attack did not kill the monster, it would at least be half dead. "Haha, that's true. I just remembered that you were modified by the blood of God. That monster is really unlucky." The Night Sister could not help but laugh. Brando could not help but smile bitterly, but Orthlis was right. He could not say whether he was still human or not. He was an elite and had the blood of God. He was too embarrassed to say that he was a purebred Eruin. "The Shire, are you okay?" He immediately turned around to look at his mage servant. The Shire was the only one who approached the sarcophagus with him and caused the monster to attack. He had such a high willpower defense, but the Shire did not. He was worried that the Shire would be affected, but he did not expect the Shire to be standing there looking at him nervously. "You're okay?" "My lord, you're okay?" The Shire also asked, looking a little surprised. "Ah," the young servant blinked, then reacted, "Mind control effects are ineffective on me. I'm just a card after all. I was worried about you, my lord." "But my lord." "Ahem, my lord, you're really beyond my expectations. You can even deal with a mental attack with such ease. You're really wise." "Ahahaha." He laughed and said. Brendel sighed helplessly. It was true that a gold-ranked warrior had a very small chance of being immune to a mind control of the same level. But this monster was unlucky to have met two weirdos like him and Seal. One of them had an extraordinarily high will, while the other was not affected by mind control at all. If there was a boss in the sarcophagus, it would probably be one of the unluckiest bosses in the Amber Sword. Thinking of this, he was ready to open the sarcophagus. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidien. Com to vote. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 504. When Brando opened the sarcophagus. At this moment, the temperature in the tomb had dropped to a certain level. A layer of white frost had formed on the walls of the tomb, and a faint gurgling sound could be heard in the darkness. Yuta, who was standing at the door with the others, was slightly startled when she heard the voice. She turned around to look for the source of the voice, only to find that it was the merchant lady beside her. Her face was pale, she was shivering from the cold, and her teeth were chattering. "Are you okay?" A strange look flashed across the female mercenary leader's eyes. She couldn't understand why this little girl was still standing here despite being so cold. However, she knew that the fiancé of the Lord was the weakest amongst all the people present, so she kindly asked, "Do you want me to send you out first?" The Roman wrapped his arms around his shoulders and shivered from the cold. However, he shook his head like a rattle drum and replied in a trembling voice, no, 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 no. I want to see Brando open the coffin. I want to see what's inside the coffin, but aren't you cold? Yuta clearly saw that the other party was freezing to death. I am cold, then, shall I walk you out? No, no, no. When Romaine answered, it was obvious that her curiosity had won over her rationality. She fully expressed that she wanted to see what was inside the sarcophagus even if she had to be frozen into an ice sculpture. If such a concept was placed in Brando's era, she would at least be a pioneer in seeking the truth. Yuta obviously did not understand the spirit of, if one hears the truth in the morning, one can die in the evening. She looked at the strange little girl and was a little speechless for a moment. Of course, she did not know that on the night when Madara invaded Erewhon and Butchie a year ago, Brando had the same thought when he looked at the fearless little Roman. While the female mercenary leader was speechless, Brando finally pried open the lid of the sarcophagus with the help of the Shire. This huge sarcophagus was trapezoidal, similar to the style of the Egyptian pharaohs' tombs. From this point, it could be seen that it was very different from the contemporary Kruse culture. The coffins of the Kruse people were generally rectangular or hexagonal like the coffins of the vampires. The culture of the Erewhon people and the Kruse people were of the same origin, and there was not much difference. The burial customs of the mountain people generally did not require a coffin. Instead, they would dig a grave in the tomb. Therefore, Brando concluded that the tomb was probably quite old, at least before the history of the mountain people. To be on the safe side, Brando only pushed the coffin lid open a small gap, but he was immediately stunned. Because from the light from the fire that seeped through the gap, the huge sarcophagus seemed to be empty. There were no skeletons or mummies that should have occupied the main position, but there were a lot of gold and silver objects buried with them. The boss is not in here. Brando's heart was filled with doubts. He carefully gestured to the Shire beside him, and the two immediately pushed the lid open. Only then did they realize that the sarcophagus was not empty. Between the oxidized gold and silver objects, in the middle of the huge sarcophagus, where the skeletons should have been, there was a pile of crystal fragments lying quietly. When Brando saw the crystal fragments, he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. This was because the crystal shards were actually in the shape of a human lying on a piece of cloth. It had obvious limbs and a torso, but no head. Damn, senior sister, don't scare me. Brando couldn't help but mutter in a voice that only he could hear. But no matter how he looked at it, he couldn't tell what the remains were. What the hell is this? The Shire looked at the crystal fragments in the coffin, and couldn't help but be stunned. Generally speaking, many burial customs had the habit of making the buried into a mummy, but the method of making a mummy was very strange, but to make a person into a crystal-like form was unheard of. And there was no head, which was even more strange. Brando carefully checked the inside of the coffin, except for the human-shaped crystal fragments, there was nothing else that looked like a skeleton. If he guessed correctly, this should be the owner of this tomb. As for the burial items beside it, Brando recognized a few familiar items at a glance. They were all magic equipment. If this was in the game, these would be the reward for this boss battle. Could this be the boss? Thinking of this, he couldn't help but look at the pile of crystal fragments again. No way, although his spiritual counterattack was very sharp, but it was broken into pieces by him in a second, it can't be so weak, right? For a moment Brando was a little confused. Not only Brando, the Shire also seemed to feel that the human-shaped crystal fragments in front of him were a little familiar. He said uncertainly in the telepathic message, "It seems like, this is the thing from before, boss." Brando nodded and didn't answer. His eyes flashed, and suddenly he found an unusually familiar thing in the pile of burial items. That thing was lying in the pile of gold and silver, it was a palm-sized dark gray stone piece. Its surface was dull, and it looked like a fragment that had fallen off from the coffin lid. If Brando didn't feel a little puzzled, and his eyes scanned the stone coffin several times, he probably wouldn't have noticed such an ordinary stone piece. But he softly said, and picked up the thing, and suddenly found that it was very similar to something he had seen before. He hesitated for a moment, and immediately took out something from his pocket. It was also a stone piece, dull and dull. Other than the fact that it was only the size of a thumb, it was almost the same as the larger stone piece in Brando's hand. This small stone piece was a relic of Viscount Nathan that he found in the Forbidden Orchard, where the golden demonic tree was when he fled with the Roman and Freya on the Zavale mountain path. Of course, it could also be said that it was a relic of Amandina's father. He remembered that among all the relics of Amandina's father, this was the only thing he didn't recognize. At that time, he thought that this stone piece was some kind of alchemy material. After all, there were thousands of materials in the amber sword, and it was normal that he didn't recognize it. He was a combat class, not a secondary class player. But later on, according to alchemist Tamar's identification, this thing was not a mineral, nor was it similar to other alchemy materials. There was no magical reaction on it, and it was more like a normal stone piece. Brando wanted to throw it away a few times, but in the end, he couldn't bear to. After all, it was obtained in a special place, and it might be a storyline item. If he threw it away, he couldn't find it again. But he didn't expect that he would find something similar to this stone piece in a nameless tomb in Tonajol. What is this? This strange stone piece appeared among the grave goods, which meant that it had some value, or at least it was recognized by the tomb owner. Brando glanced at the other grave goods. Although they weren't priceless, after all, they were rewards from a level 30 dungeon, but at least most of them were magical items. The rest represented the equivalent of art, gold, silver, and pottery. This stone piece appeared in the hands of Amandina's father, and now it appeared hundreds of miles away in an ancient tomb from hundreds of years ago. The secrets of two different eras were intertwined, and Brando frowned. He thought for a long time, but he couldn't come to a conclusion. The most reasonable guess was that this stone piece was some kind of special grave goods, and it might have been given a special meaning in a certain era. Viscount Nesson happened to be an archaeologist, enthusiast, and this was the only explanation. But it was a little disrespectful to the deceased. After all, there was no evidence to prove that Amandina's father was a grave robber. Moreover, Viscount Nesson always carried this ordinary stone piece with him, and placed it together with the letter he sent to Amandina. This meant that he was at least very proud of this item. Brando couldn't think of any value to this item, and it wasn't a flint spear tip from the Stone Age. Brando thought for a while, and decided to carefully keep this stone piece. At least, this strange stone piece appeared in this tomb, which meant that it had lived for a much longer time than Erwin. Oh, there's a card of fate here. Brando suddenly heard the Shire's surprised voice through telepathy. He turned around and saw his attendant hooking his index finger into the sarcophagus. A black object flew out from the layers of spider webs. It looked like a box. On the surface of the box, there was a triangle carved in yang, and on the inside of the triangle, there was a circle carved in yin. The two patterns formed a strange symbol, and there were some rising flame patterns around the symbol. But his eyes flashed, and he saw a silver flash under the box. It was actually connected to a thin silver line that was almost imperceptible to the naked eye. Brando's face changed when he saw the silver line, and his voice trembled as he shouted, "Put it down." But it was too late. The Shire had already grabbed the box in his hands, and he looked back at his master in confusion. But suddenly, the entire tomb began to tremble. The floor shook violently, and the dust on the ceiling rustled down. The pillars around them began to tilt, emitting a creaking sound that made one's teeth ache. Now everyone understood what was happening. It was obvious that someone had triggered an incredible mechanism. "Ah!" The Shire jumped in fright. "Ah! My lord, this is just an accident." To him, this was really an accident. The background of the card explained that he was actually a magus who grew up in an ivory tower. Unlike adventurers, NPC magi grew up in a vast sea of books. They had nothing to do with adventuring, and would not know where the traps in the dungeons were. But the Shire's strength made him and Brando overlook this point. And Brando had also neglected an important point. The Shire was a native, and not a player magus. Holy shit! Brando immediately cursed in his heart. He immediately said, "Don't worry about the accident. Run, this tomb is going to collapse." Most of the underground tombs in Amber Room had self-destruct mechanisms, but players with a little experience would not fall for such a trick. Now, he looked at the Shire and felt a lot of sweat in his heart. The two of them looked at each other and turned around at the same time. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Cheatien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 505. Both of them had a tacit understanding. The moment Seal turned around, he opened his arms wide, ignoring the spiders and other multi-legged insects that were crawling around the sarcophagus. He picked up the scattered funerary objects and rushed out. Brendel, on the other hand, pounced to the side and rolled to avoid the stone slab that fell from the ceiling. He came to the side of the skeleton that was lying on the side of the sarcophagus. He got up and spat out the sand in his mouth. He looked around and saw a few cards of fate under the skeleton. At this moment, the sand above his head was falling, almost burying the cards. Brando quickly reached out his hand to grab them. But as soon as he did, the eyes of the skeleton that he didn't pay attention to flashed red. It suddenly stood up and extended its claws to grab Brando's neck. Brendel was taken aback. A mere skeleton was even worse than Madara's lowest-ranked skeleton soldiers. If it was any other day, Brendel would not even pay attention to it. But at this moment, dozens of rocks were pouring down from above his head. If he hesitated, he would be buried alive in the grave. Right at this critical moment, a bright arrow of fire shot out from behind him. It brushed past his face and struck the skeletal claw that was gripping his neck. Sparks flew everywhere, and he felt his hair curling up from the heat. But the skeletal claw was unable to withstand this level of attack and broke off with a loud bang. The pressure on his body was released, and he immediately grabbed the card of fates and retreated for his life. There was an earth-shattering explosion behind him. A quarter of the tomb had collapsed, and the sand had almost reached the stone platform in the middle. Brendel's back was drenched in cold sweat. He quickly turned around to see who had such a strong mental fortitude to shoot out such a precise spell at such a critical moment. It was the first time he had seen such a perfect spell in the game. Seal did not have many elemental apprentices under him, and he could not think of anyone who was so daring and meticulous. But when he turned around, Brando saw a face that he couldn't have imagined. At the entrance of the tomb, the little Roman raised her index finger and waved it at him proudly. There was a wisp of flame at the tip of her finger that was dissipating. Seeing the merchant lady's expression, she wanted to say something, but she was immediately pulled away by the female mercenary commander. When did this young lady learn magic? Brando couldn't help but think that the little girl was quite talented in casting spells. Her accuracy in casting spells was something that many high-level players couldn't do. But he immediately thought of a more terrifying possibility. Perhaps the little Roman didn't even aim properly, and was just lucky that she missed. Brando couldn't help but shudder when he thought of this. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that this was the truth based on the little girl's usual behavior. He immediately made up his mind to not let the little witch continue to learn magic. Otherwise, he might one day be fried by a fireball from behind. At this time, there were only a few people left at the entrance of the tomb. Most of the others had retreated. Brando immediately gestured to the rest of the people, indicating that they should hurry up and leave. He then rushed to the entrance of the tomb. The others probably saw that their lord was out of danger, so they all retreated. But at this moment, Brando, who had rushed to the entrance of the tomb, suddenly heard a clear and strange sound behind him. Crack! Instinctively, he felt the hairs on his back standing on end, and he subconsciously moved to the side. He saw a crystal spear flickering with multicolored light shoot past his original position. If he had taken another step forward, then this spear would have undoubtedly opened a bloody hole in his chest. He was almost scared to death. When he looked back, he saw a crystal creature with a glittering crystal body crawling out of the sarcophagus. It looked like a crystal figure. The crystal body vaguely looked like a robe. It was about 5 feet tall and had a strong physique, but it didn't have a head. Brando estimated that if this thing had a head and a neck, it would be considered tall among the Erewhon people. There was no doubt that such a thing could not have been hidden in the sarcophagus. The first thing that came to Brando's mind was the crystal fragments. But he had never seen such a boss in the amber sword before. He couldn't help but feel a little curious. After all, there were few monsters below level 40 that he didn't know. At this moment, the thing had completely crawled out of the sarcophagus. Although it was completely made of crystal, its movements were not stiff. Brando estimated that its dexterity was at least 70, which was only half of his. But the sound of the crystal spear piercing through the air made him feel a lingering fear. Its attack power was at least on par with Veronica when she didn't use her elemental power. This thing was a power-type monster. And it was good at mental attacks. Brando's heart went cold. The data reminded him of something. It had only been a year since he transmigrated to this world. He could still clearly remember the last patch before he transmigrated. The patch after Hopeless Night was called The Earth Awakens. As usual, this expansion pack did not have any introduction. But in the later stages of the Slate War, after the death of the Alpha Wolfakis, Fanzin and Madara fought, the whole world's attention was focused on the battle between the two factions of players. The battle between him and the Orkash Mountains was just the tip of the iceberg of this huge battle. The cause of this battle was simply a competition for resources. An area that had never been set foot in the wilderness of the East was discovered by a group of adventurers. Because of this, the flames of war began. Brendel still remembered the legends of the East, about a new life form that had never been seen before in the wilderness. Crystal clusters. A type of spirit that was 100 times more tenacious than humans and possessed powerful mental powers. But why were there crystal clusters here? This was not 100 years later, nor was it in the distant East. This was Erewhon, within the borders of civilization. Even though I'm not sure if Vaunt had crystal clusters 100 years ago, especially in Oween's borders, the game designer must have buried them a little too long. This is the first version of the game, and it's nearly 10 years in the real world. I'm not sure if crystal clusters existed in Vaunt, especially in Oween. But with this doubt, he still pulled out Halran Gaia. This was because the crystal monster had already stretched out its hands towards him. Another crystal spike whizzed towards him. At this moment, Brando saw that the spike was shot from the back of the monster. He turned his hand and shattered the spike in midair. But this attack made his arm feel slightly numb. Although he had not used the Dark Dragon's Berserk ability, nor did he use the enhancement crystal, it was enough to explain the problem. This monster's attack power was indeed different from Veronica's in her normal state. This further confirmed his previous guess, which was that it was the peak of a level 40 boss. Brando secretly felt that something was wrong. Under normal circumstances, he would be overjoyed to encounter such a boss. Although he had already obtained the loot, the boss's EXP was also much higher than ordinary monsters. Not to mention, a boss would usually have some special alchemy materials that could not be collected normally. But now was not the time. The tomb was shaking and could collapse at any time. But the monster did not seem to want to let him leave safely. Brando knew that this was part of the dungeon's design. But this monster's attack power was strong and its agility was not bad. If it tried its best to keep him here, it would not be fun. Even if the monster's mental attacks were ineffective against him, it would not be easy for him to kill this monster. Moreover, judging from the monster's previous performance, its intelligence was not too bad. Please don't play with me. You'll be crushed to death, right? He could not help but whisper to the monster. At the same time, he carefully retreated along the shaky tunnel. Seeing that the tomb's door was right in front of him, he was about to heave a sigh of relief. But he did not expect the monster to suddenly pounce on him like a madman. F***CK. Brando could not help but immediately activate charge. His whole body turned into a meteor and shot out of the tomb. The monster seemed to have expected this and suddenly stopped. It let out a resonating cry, and the entire crypt began to vibrate. Brendel saw a flash of white light in front of him, and a thick crystal wall appeared in front of the tomb's door. His heart sank. He knew that if he wanted to escape, he would have to kill the monster first. Brando cursed and turned back to face the monster. But he did not expect the monster to stop after casting its spell. It looked at Brando. Brando was sure that the monster was looking at him. Although it did not have a head or eyes, he felt like he was being watched. The monster looked at him for a moment, then retreated. Brendel saw it climb up the sarcophagus again, then jump down. Then, he jumped down. Then it disappeared. Brando was sure that the sarcophagus was not deep enough to cover the monster. He was stunned for a moment. Then he reacted. There's a secret passage. Brendel immediately understood what the monster was trying to do. It wanted to trap him and kill him here. Of course, it was not the first time he encountered such a cunning boss. But this monster wanted to trick him. He could not accept it. Did it think that he was still a newbie? To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Cheatien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 506. Have you ever seen a waterfall of mud and gravel? Brando was lucky enough to experience it himself. There was no place to stand, and he was about to be buried in the belly of the mountain. He had no way out, and it was as if he was in a desperate situation. The monster completely disappeared under the sarcophagus. He cursed, raised the Halran Gaia with both hands and swung it upwards. A crescent-shaped sword aura split the earth and stones and rushed towards the stone platform in the center. Although the sword aura was not as amazing as the White Raven sword art, it could cover a distance of 10 feet in an instant. Rise! Brando roared, and the magic power on the Halran Gaia vibrated from the bottom of the dimension. A loud noise like a sharp sword tearing the ground apart, and a row of rock teeth emerged from the loose earth and stones in a straight line. These stone pillars supported the ceiling and blocked the earth and stones from sliding to the center, opening a safe path for Brando. The Halran Gaia was also known as the Scepter of Rocks. According to legend, the person who held this scepter could command the earth. Of course, the reality was not so exaggerated, but the underground was no doubt its home ground. The tomb that was on the verge of collapse temporarily stabilized, but only temporarily. Fine cracks had appeared on the stone pillars. Brando looked back at the crystal wall that was shining with colorful light and hesitated. The Chaos Crystal Wall was a spell that could not be broken in a few seconds. He immediately turned around and rushed to the stone platform in the center. Brando climbed up the sarcophagus. The bottom of the huge trapezoidal container had opened, and a mysterious underground passage appeared in front of him. Because there was no fire, the passage was dark, and the stairs seemed to lead to the legendary scorching abyss under Jorgendy Ridge. In an instant, there was a dense cracking sound behind him, and the stone pillars were collapsing. Brando did not dare to think too much. He gritted his teeth and jumped into the sarcophagus. The outside of the tomb had completely collapsed, and the ceiling was like a funnel that came in contact with the ground. A huge gust of wind blew in from the outside, causing Brendel to be unable to open his eyes. Then there was a deafening roar that shook the ground, and the whole world was completely silent. The fire was completely extinguished, and the torches in the tomb outside were extinguished by the sand. Brando fell into a pitch-black darkness. Vigilantly, he swept Halran Gaia in front of him to prevent the monster from launching a sneak attack. However, there was nothing around him. The monster seemed to know that it was no match for him and had fled far away. Brando could not help but spit. That's why I hate fighting intelligent monsters. The perception of a warrior who had entered the realm of gold was 10 times better than an ordinary person. Even if there was no light, he could still accurately feel the fluoride in his pocket. Raising the small stone, the dim light illuminated a narrow space around it. It was the underground of the underground. The top of the sarcophagus had been completely sealed, and a large amount of soil and stones had even poured into the secret passage. He first used his sword to poke upwards, but the soil and stones were stacked together tightly, and it seemed that there was no chance of digging out. Brando cursed again in a low voice, "Damn it, the Shire, are you there?" There was no distance on the other side of the soul, but there was a moment of silence. After a moment, the voice of the young mage servant sounded, "Bah, bah. This place." "I'm here, my lord, are you okay? Where are you?" What followed was a series of questions. Brando looked up at the narrow space. The man-made tunnel was narrow and rough, like the perfunctory work of a careless craftsman. "I don't know, I should still be under the tomb. How's the situation outside?" Fortunately, only part of the tomb collapsed and blocked the way. Miss Scarlet and the others are trying to find a way to open a path. What about the others? Everyone is fine, no one is hurt. Miss Roman is also fine. She is roasting mushrooms. Roasting mushrooms? Brando was stunned. Cough. She found some graveyard moss. She can even eat that. Brando was a little inexplicably surprised, but he was also relieved. The little girl was full of vitality, and it seemed that there was no big problem. Let her be. Brando sighed and decided to indulge the girl who claimed to be a great merchant. The Shire did not say that Miss Roman was roasting mushrooms for his lord. Instead, he asked, "By the way, I still have the spoils in the sarcophagus. There are a lot of things. My lord, why don't you find a way to summon me? Maybe I can help." Brendel chuckled. He could hear the concern in his squire's voice, but he replied in an exasperated tone, "It's still afternoon, and there are at least 10 more hours until the reset phase. If you're feeling dizzy, go rest. How far is it from the surface?" I think it should be very close. My lord, you know, I have always been quite confident in my ability to escape." It's not worth bragging about, Brando thought. Then you should find a way to get out as soon as possible and contact the people outside. Good plan. But wait, my lord, how can I get out as soon as possible? The Shire immediately shouted. You are a wizard. Do you need me to teach you this kind of thing? Sorcerers aren't omnipotent. Especially a pitiful low researcher like me. My lord, you may not know, but in private, the people of the Silver Alliance call us scholars. Well, I mean, it's not a bad title, but what do you want a weak and pitiful person like me to do? I'm not one of those violent elementalists whose brains are full of muscles. Brando was a little speechless. This guy was actually acting cute. As he lifted the fluorite, the faint light spread down along the rough rock wall, reflecting a downward spiral space. He held his sword tightly in one hand and was about to go down to take a look, but the voice in his mind became clear again. Wait, my lord. Did you find something new on your side? The Shire shouted. Brando stopped. How did you know? I guessed. My lord, do you remember the box I took last? It was a trap. It would have been better if the box was not mentioned. Once it was mentioned, Brando was angry. This guy actually had the nerve to say it. He was about to explode when he heard his wizard squire hurriedly add, "My lord, wait. I was going to say that the box was empty. You tricked me with an empty box. You're a disgrace to all the wizards." Brendel said in annoyance. Well, it was an accident, but the situation is not like this. That box was a planeswalker's personal belongings. I recognize the symbol on it. The triangle and the inscribed circle represent the stable iron law and the internal balance. The flame outside is the black flame of Echelon. This box must have something to do with Kelsey. You are not going to tell me that this is his tomb, are you? Brando's eyelids twitched. Something like that. I suspect that there is something else under this tomb. No matter how mysterious it is only a level 40 dungeon. Brando did not say this out loud. However, he also suspected that there was something related to the planeswalker under the tomb. He had a faint connection in his heart. Thinking of this, he remembered to take out the cards in his hand and look at them under the fluorescent light. 5 cards. The first card was drawn with the image of a spellcaster in the fog. A slender silhouette was formed in the hazy fog. However, it had 4 hands, slender and powerful. 3 of the hands were raised high to weave a spell, while the other hand pointed forward. A large army was advancing in the fog. Echelon Spellweaver, Paradise of Adversity X, 7 Dark, Creature, Echelon Spellweaver, Level 25 Elite, Effect, Tap, pay 5% of HP, gain 1 light. The Eye of Arrow. A wizard close to the peak of silver. However, the effect was similar to a land card and there was no maintenance cost. Brando thought that the more of these cards, the better. Then he took out the second card. This card was drawn in an abstract way with a man in a long robe. The man held his head with both hands and looked like he had a migraine. The name of the card was Anxiety Disorder. Its effect was a mess. Anxiety Disorder, Paradise of Adversity 7, 2 Energy, Spell, Instant, Effect, copy the effect of a spell that costs no more than 30 HP. For every spell used in this turn, copy the spell once. Time is like gravel, passing by in a hurry. Upon seeing this card, Brando could not help but curse in his heart. Although he hadn't fully figured out what the card's description meant, from the literal meaning, it was at least the kind of thing that, although I don't understand it, it seems very powerful. But what was this 2 energy? He was stunned for a moment and suddenly remembered something. The green text on his retina swept across and a card appeared in his vision. Echelon's Furnace of Adversity, Paradise of Adversity 3, 30 Dark, Barrier, Lair, Effect. When the furnace enters the field, attach it to the land card. Tap, any 2. Sacrifice an Echelon soldier to gain 2 energy points for the furnace. When a traveler passes through the Great Plains, the Lutsai volcano in the north is shrouded in dark clouds all day long. Damn, it really is a set of cards. Brando muttered in his heart, wondering where he could find so many Echelon soldiers to sacrifice. As he was thinking, he took out the next card. He was slightly stunned when he saw that it was another Echelon Spellweaver in his hand. Brando's expression changed slightly. He quickly flipped over all the cards below. An Echelon Spellweaver, followed by another. He was instantly stunned. The remaining cards were all the same Echelon Spellweaver. Even if it was a prophecy, it did not have to be like this, right? This was the first time he had obtained 4 of the same cards in the same place. This made Brando think of a possibility. Perhaps the cards in this tomb were really a complete set. Just as he was thinking, a slight noise came from below the tunnel. Who's there? Brando immediately pointed his sword in that direction. He saw something flash in the darkness in front of him. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 507. The figure in the darkness disappeared in a flash. Brando hesitated for a moment before he picked up his sword and chased after it. The tunnel seemed to have no end. The light of the fluorite extended forward, and there were always gray walls in sight. This color meant that the rocks were coated with a layer of lime paint. Most of the tombs used similar methods to prevent erosion. The sound of footsteps grew louder in front of him, which meant that there was a cavity in front of him. Brando slowed down. The figure in front of him flashed, and the crystal figure that he saw before appeared in front of him. It raised its hand and shot 2 crystal spikes at him. Damn! Brando raised his sword and shattered the spikes. He then gritted his teeth and shook his hand. Martha above, this guy's brute force was really frightening. The monster saw that its attack did not succeed, so it immediately retreated. Although it was not fast, it disappeared with the help of the shadows. Brando angrily cursed from the bottom of his heart. Even the designer of this scene would be terrified if he heard it. He hurriedly chased after it. But he only took a few steps before he stopped again. He turned back and raised the fluorite. The dim light seemed to break through the limits of the narrow space and spread in all directions, pouring down a deep corridor. It turned out that he had unintentionally rushed out of the long tunnel. In front of him was a long corridor that was as wide as a hole. Rows of pillars stood in the darkness, and the fluorescent light in his hand could only illuminate a small area to the left. It was not even 1/100th of the area. The long corridor extended forward. The ground was paved with black and white marble. In addition to being gray, it was also full of cracks. But it could be imagined that this was originally a majestic underground palace. Brando could not help but hold his breath. This did not look like a tomb. Even the king's tomb was not built like this. He suddenly exclaimed softly. He found that the ground and the lower half of the pillars were covered with patterns. He originally thought that it was a mural, but when he got closer, he found that the so-called patterns were silver lines inlaid in the grooves of the marble. Brando's hands trembled, and he almost had the urge to kneel down and use Halran Gaia to dig out the shiny silver patterns, because he recognized that it was mithril. Only mithril would be used to make such things. Runic magic circle. But he forced himself to hold back. He raised his head and looked at the entire hole. The vast darkness seemed to be nurturing an irresistible power that made people lose their ability to speak for a moment. This long corridor that looked like a kingdom of giants was actually a rune magic circle. He suddenly remembered his past experience of going deep into the cold winter temple. It was the legendary sanctuary of the goddess of the north wind, Jubius. It was a cold winter sanctuary protected by 4 statues of the goddess of the north. Golden runes stretched for thousands of meters, forming the raging north wind all year round. It was as magnificent and majestic as this place. However, the formation in front of him looked more like a graveyard. The silver runes on the floor of the corridor seemed to have lost their function long ago. Everything was silent and boundless. What is this place? Brando muttered to himself. He curiously walked along the marble floor that was covered with earthworm-like silver runes. His footsteps echoed in the darkness. From afar, it looked like a small dot of light moving slowly in the boundless darkness. Legend had it that the Winter Temple was the main temple of the goddess of northern wind. It was located in the misty mountains of the present day, far away from the mortal world. But who had built this tomb? How could there be such a magnificent structure hidden underground? After walking for a while, he suddenly remembered something. He summoned Orthless and whispered, "Lady Orthless, are you there?" "Yes, I've always been here." The female knight's calm voice rang in his mind. Do you want to go in and have a look? Brando nodded. Have you heard of this place before, Lady Orthlis? No, I haven't seen it before. Orthlis was also curious. But this place is not simple. The runes on the ground seem to be older than my time. Little guy, you can really find these amazing things by accident. Brando smiled bitterly. Shoo, Orthlis suddenly said, that thing is near you. That thing. Brando suddenly realized that it was the crystal statue. He cursed under his breath and was about to turn around, but Orthlis stopped him. Don't move, it's behind you. Pretend to walk forward and wait for me to remind you. Brando's eyes lit up. The monster seemed to be very familiar with the terrain. If it was determined to play hide-and-seek with him, it would be a little troublesome. But with Orthlis's method, he might be able to trick it into coming over and killing it. He nodded in his mind and walked forward without looking behind him. The elf had gone through many trials and tribulations with him. He could trust that Orthlis would not harm him. Just like that, the two of them slowly walked down the corridor. Their footsteps were extremely rhythmic, like the pendulum of a rusty clock, ticking, ticking. Brando had one hand on the hilt of Halran Gaia. On the surface, it looked like he was observing the surroundings, but in reality, his mind was focused behind him. He was waiting for the monster to appear so that he could kill it. After a while, Orthlis suddenly shouted, behind the left, behind the third pillar. Brando instinctively swung Halran Gaia behind him, and a white light shot behind the pillar. There was a loud bang, followed by a scream. Brando's sharp eyes saw a figure quickly retreating from the dust. However, it was obviously injured, and its movements were much slower than before. Still want to run? Brando felt that if he let this thing escape again, he would really curse at it. As soon as the monster retreated, he immediately activated the charge skill. His whole body turned into a black line and circled around the monster's back. He actually managed to block the monster's escape route even though he started later. Amidst the dust was the crystal figure from before. It had suffered a huge loss from Brando's unexpected attack and lost one of its legs. Brando thought to himself. No wonder it was so slow, but this was not a reason for him to go easy on it. As soon as he came to a stop, he stabbed Halran Gaia. Although the attack power of the crystal humanoid was surprisingly high, its agility and defense were unexpectedly low. Theoretically speaking, even if he had launched a sneak attack on a boss of this level, he should not have been able to break its limbs with a single slash. However, Brando was more than happy to see monsters with zero defense. He had already used all his strength in this attack. A faint white light flashed on the blade, a sign that he had used piercing strike. The crystal humanoid was unable to dodge in time. A card suddenly appeared in front of its chest. A ripple spread out from the card, and it blocked the tip of Halran Gaia. The card of fate. Brando was shocked. A huge force surged from Halran Gaia, and he lost his grip on it and let it fly out of his hand. However, he did not care about the fact that his right hand had lost all feeling. He immediately rolled backwards, and a sun blade card appeared in his left hand. A platinum light flew out from the sun blade, forming a flaming sword in midair. The sword pierced the chest of the crystal humanoid. The entire area suddenly went silent. Then, a crack appeared on the crystal humanoid's chest. This crack immediately expanded to half of its body. The crystal humanoid seemed to be struggling to pounce on Brando. However, it had only taken a single step when it completely collapsed. With a crash, it turned into a large number of crystal fragments that scattered all over the ground. Brando and Orthlis were both stunned. Brando could not help but look at the sun blade card in his hand. The card had lost its color and had dimmed. This was because it had been shuffled back into the deck. A card that had lost its color could not be used again until it was picked up by the player. However, this was not what he was concerned about. He was more concerned about whether he had mistakenly picked up a powerful weapon. The Sun Blade was never an offensive card that dealt a lot of damage. It could only be said that it had a special advantage against the undead. When he saw the crystal humanoid using the card of fate, his mind went blank. He thought that the crystal humanoid was a planeswalker like himself. Furthermore, when he thought about what the Shire had said, he was even more certain. He did not expect the crystal humanoid to be a planeswalker. This contrast was simply too great. Brando was stunned for a long time before he noticed a notification in his vision. You have killed Commander Tier Monster, Semi-Crystal Letterer. You have gained 72310 EXP. It really is a Commander Tier monster, the half-crystallized Letterer. This thing is actually an NPC. Only then did he react. He hurriedly looked at the pile of crystal shards and saw what he had expected. A silver card lay quietly in the pile of shards, reflecting the light of the fluorite in his hand. This is the card of fate. Brando was puzzled. How could this thing use the card of fate? According to Tumen, the card of fate was a kind of law that only planeswalkers could touch. Ordinary people could not even see this kind of law. He rubbed his numb right arm and got up to pick up the card of fate. Silver cards were much rarer than ordinary cards. At the same cost, they were more powerful than ordinary cards. The Silver Fairy Princess Metasha was one such example. At the same cost of 15, she was basically Brando's strongest trump card. This card had a silver ring drawn on it, with cloud patterns on it. The name of the card was Enrolda's Holy Ring. It looked like a treasure, but it was actually a spell. Enrolda's Holy Ring, Paradise of Adversity XX, 10 lights, spell, instant, effect, the next attack is ineffective. Sanctuary, Paradise of Adversity again. Brando looked at the card and understood why his previous attack did not work. However, he could not see what was so special about this card that it could be used by a monster. If the crystal person was a planeswalker, it did not seem like it. A planeswalker could not only have one card, right? At the very least, it should have a land card, right? While he was puzzled, he suddenly heard steady footsteps in the darkness. Brando and Orthless were shocked. The footsteps sounded very close to them, and they did not even notice that there was someone nearby. Although Brando felt that it was understandable that he did not notice it, Orthless was different. She was a heroic spirit from more than 1,000 years ago. Although her physical body did not exist in this world, her senses did not decrease by much. The female knight immediately realized that it was an extremely powerful enemy coming from the darkness. Be careful, she warned sternly. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Calm to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 508. The footsteps became clearer, accompanied by a heavy, metallic sound. A tall silhouette appeared in the darkness. It was as tall as 2 people and as wide as a wall. Then, a cold, metallic human face appeared in the shadows. The face was expressionless, and half of its face was covered with crystals. The crystals extended from its neck all the way to its shoulder, forming a huge tumor-like object. It wore a long cloak, and the metal strips of the cloak hung down to the ground. A steel-like hand reached out from under the cloak, holding a bronze staff as thick as an adult's arm. The monster stopped not far away from Brendel, and the position where it stopped made Brendel cursed inwardly, because it was standing right next to the Halran Gaia that flew out. After the monster stopped, Orthless and Brando heard a rhythmic ticking sound coming from its body. The ticking sound was like the beating of a heart. It was the sound of a pendulum. Under the cloak was a huge pendulum, like a clockwork that controlled the monster's movements. This was the guardian of the Tower of Babel, a LV-92 pendulum golem. Brando's expression changed. Babel Fortress was thousands of miles away. How could a monster like the pendulum golem appear here? Was the world in chaos? Furthermore, the Tower of Babel was updated in the 7th patch. With the pendulum golem's current strength, it was one of the strongest in Kurlutz. In the Last of Blossoms era, even 3 Veronicas would not be a match for it. Brando could not help but gulp. Orthlis did not seem to recognize this monster. She instinctively felt that it did not come with good intentions. She noticed the slight change in Brando's heart and asked, "You know this thing?" "This is a pendulum golem." He was speechless, not knowing how to describe its strength. "In short, it's very, very powerful. We are far from its match. The only good thing is that it's a magic puppet and cannot activate its elemental energy. Do you have any way to escape? Don't think of me as a savior. It won't help your growth." Orthlis replied in a huff. "What's the point of thinking about growth now? If we can't escape, we'll all die here," Brando thought to himself. But the pendulum golem did not seem to notice Brendel, or rather, it was as if it did not see him. It looked coldly at the Halran Gaia on the ground, reached out its hand, and a chain came out from under its cloak, wrapped around the Halran Gaia, and threw it over from afar. The Halran Gaia landed beside Brando's feet with a clang and spun around. Brando was stunned. What was the meaning of this? Could it be that the pendulum golem still believed in the night spirit and would not kill unarmed enemies? Did that mean that everything would be fine as long as he didn't pick up the sword? Brando could not help but fantasize. However, the pendulum golem in front of him was no ordinary pendulum golem. Its most eye-catching features were the crystals on its face and shoulders. Normal pendulum golems did not have such unique ornaments. However, this was not good news for Brando. Whether it was an elite or a boss monster, neither was something he could handle. To be honest, he could not even defeat a normal boss monster. The pendulum golem threw the Halran Gaia to Brando's feet and spoke with a cold, metallic tone. "So you're an apprentice planeswalker, and you still use this kind of thing? How boring. What the?" Brando felt like crying. The Halran Gaia was being looked down upon. However, he still picked up the sword. He could not defeat this thing anyway, so there was no need for it to use any tricks against him. "You're a planeswalker. Seems like you still don't understand. A planeswalker is a powerful existence that uses the realm as a chessboard. There is no need to rely on such weak things." The pendulum golem ignored him and pointed at the sword in his hand. "I am not a planeswalker, but I follow the Great Master. His power is unimaginable." As it spoke, it waved its bronze scepter. A card appeared out of thin air and opened a door of light. From the door, a group of puppet swordsmen walked out. These puppet swordsmen's bodies glowed with a bronze luster. Their limbs and torso were densely packed with rivets. They held flowery swords in their hands and carried a large clockwork on their backs. There were more than 20 of them. As soon as they appeared, the pendulum golem waved its bronze scepter. "Attack! Chase away the invaders." Saying you're not a planeswalker while using the card of fate. Where is the justice? Where is the law? Brando cursed in his heart and quickly retreated. These puppets were called clockwork swordsmen. They were only level 40 monsters, but there were too many of them. Moreover, there was a pendulum golem behind them that looked like a planeswalker. Brando did not dare to fight and quickly retreated. However, the pendulum golem snorted coldly. Duel of Fate. It slammed its bronze scepter on the ground. With a loud bang, a card fell from the sky and drew a circle of light on the ground. Brando's speed was extremely fast. He just happened to hit the edge of the circle of light. With a loud bang, blood flowed out of his head. Brando saw stars and almost fainted. However, he immediately received a notification, Duel of Fate. Before the winner of the duel is determined, entering or leaving the duel is prohibited. Although he was dizzy, his reaction was extremely fast. He immediately shouted like a hoodlum, "I admit defeat." Unexpectedly, the circle of light flashed for a moment and then completely dimmed. That works. Even the pendulum golem was stunned. You. Orthless, who had been watching from the sidelines, was speechless. You. Don't tell anyone that I know you. It's too embarrassing. Brando's face also turned red. However, survival was more important at this moment. He scrambled out of the circle of light. Behind him, the pendulum golem coldly shouted, "Idiot, the path to the surface has been sealed. Where can you run to?" When Brando heard this, he suddenly remembered that there was such a thing. His heart sank. However, he was not someone who would give up easily. He immediately rolled to the side and hid behind a pillar. He took a few deep breaths. "What do you plan to do?" Orthless, who had been watching from the sidelines, asked calmly. "What else can I do? Should I play hide-and-seek with it and wait for the Shire to dig in?" Orthless rolled her eyes. "You don't know the terrain as well as it does. Besides, its profession is similar to yours. Aren't you afraid that it will summon some strange creatures? No matter how big this place is, it won't be able to hold hundreds of creatures searching at once." "You're right." Brando nodded. He was just joking to ease the tension. If not, he would have died from the tension. He thought for a moment and said, "I guess I'll just have to fight it." "How?" Orthless asked curiously. "It's a planeswalker. I'll use a planeswalker's method to fight it." Even though that monster is strong, its summoned creatures aren't anything special. Once I destroy them, I'll play hide-and-seek with it however I want. Even though Brando said that he was going to fight it, his plan was carefully thought out. Orthless could not find any fault with it, so she nodded. Brando immediately checked his cards. However, he could not help but grumble inwardly. To be honest, he did not have many cards that he could use. The main cards that he used in the Loop of Trade Winds were the Wind Spirit Spiders, the Fireclaw Lizards, and the Fire Djinn. Even the pristine Archangel was lying there quietly. He could not help but curse Endesha. He still had the Silver Fairy Princess, Medisha, the Highland Wizard, the Mephistopheles, and the Mercenaries of Lopez. He could not summon them into the game because he had not reached the reset stage yet. In fact, other than these cards, he did not have many cards that he could use. First, there were 6 cards in his hand. Sunblade had already been used. The remaining cards were Energy Loss, Sprint Drive, Golden Battle Flag, Rune Summoner, Graveyard Resurrection, and 2 Bloodline cards, Night Lord and Vampire Baron. Apart from the Eternal Orb, the other cards on the field were either related to resources or supplementary cards, which were basically useless. He thought for a while and decided to summon the Night Lord. It was a level 35 elite, which was at least the same level as Medisha. Moreover, it was a rare silver card. His Dark Elemental pool was basically full. After leveling up in the Dark Forest, he had a total of 30 Dark Elemental points. After paying 15 Dark Elemental points and displaying the card, a cloud of dark dust appeared in front of him. The girl was so beautiful that she did not seem human. Although she was not human in the first place, the vampire girl's skin was as white as snow. Her long black hair shone like obsidian. Her lips were as red as blood, and her eyelashes were slightly closed as if she was in a state of deep sleep. Her body had the most perfect curves. Although it was far from being breathtaking, it gave people a strange feeling of being more and more beautiful. The girl opened her eyes, and a pair of cold red eyes stared coldly at Brando. She clasped her hands together, and the black smoke gathered again and wrapped around her body, forming a tight black evening dress. The dress was tucked in at the bottom, forming a bell-shaped skirt. Brando was stunned. He almost blurted out, "Beautiful lady, are you sure you can dress like this in battle?" But the girl was one step ahead of him. She frowned impatiently and said, "Tell me, where is the enemy?" Of course, the enemy was behind them. At this time, the pendulum golem behind the pillar did not seem to notice Brando's movements. It was still commanding the 20 or so clockwork swordsmen to move forward, forming a net to search for them. It also summoned a mechanical ball made of gears that floated in the air. Brando did not immediately recognize what it was, but he was sure that it was not something that would benefit him. He pointed in a direction and said to the vampire girl in front of him, "Those clockwork swordsmen, I'll attract their attention. You can ambush them from the side. Kill as many as you can. Any questions?" "Okay," the girl replied simply. "What's your name?" Brando suddenly asked. "My name is Enrich. My family name is Demetrius. Remember, I don't want to repeat the same thing twice." The girl looked at him and replied coldly. "This girl is interesting," Orthla suddenly said in his mind. Brando smiled bitterly. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Calm to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 509. Before he left, Brando took a look at Enrich's status. He realized that the vampire girl was much more powerful than he had imagined. Enrich was one of the rare dual elemental players. Other than the soul elemental element, she also had a blood elemental element. Dual elemental elements were extremely rare in the Amber Sword. There might not even be one in 10,000 players. Brando had never seen such a thing before. After all, it was impossible for a player to have dual elemental elements. Most vampires relied on their blood-kin abilities to fight. However, Enrich was a sorcerer, a rare magician. At the same time, she was a warrior, a dual-wielding swordswoman. What kind of weirdo is this? Brendel was stunned. He had never seen a vampire with a profession level before. At the bottom of the list was Enrich's card ability. Pay 5 SP to place a small group of black derivatives, blood kin, into the field. At this time, the pendulum golem and its clockwork swordsmen were very close. Strangely, it seemed to have noticed Brando, but it only ordered its clockwork swordsmen to fan out and slowly surround him. It didn't move, and Brando didn't know what it was thinking. Brando didn't care what it was thinking. He gestured to Enrich, and then jumped out of the pillar. As soon as he got up, he activated charge. His movements were several times faster than before, and the distance between him and the clockwork swordsman on the far left seemed to have closed. The puppet didn't have time to react. It clumsily tried to raise its sword to block, but Brando had already blocked it with his sword. At the same time, he took a step forward and turned into a phantom. His real body had already circled behind the clockwork swordsman, and his sword pierced through its slender neck. It was as if two Brandos had attacked from the front and back, and the puppet was instantly killed. Brendel did not dare to continue fighting after his successful attack. He turned around and ran, preparing to hide behind another pillar. However, the expressionless pendulum golem saw through his plan. It slammed its heavy bronze cane on the ground and shouted, "He's trying to escape. Number 7, number 8, number 9, take 10 steps forward. Number 3, number 4, get over number 1's corpse and seal off his escape route." The pendulum golem was like a chess player with precise calculations. Under its command, the clockwork swordsman blocked Brando's path of escape. Brando cursed inwardly. Since when did the pendulum golem have such a ferocious ability? The pendulum golem was one of the lower-level guards of the Tower of Babel. It had high attack, high defense, and high HP. It was also immune to elemental magic, and could use time stop, time rewind, time vortex, and other skills within 10 feet of it. Countless melee classes and elementalists had been beaten to a pulp by it. However, this monster was slow, and archers could deal with it perfectly. However, this pendulum golem was clearly not the one that Brando knew. While Brando cursed inwardly, Enrich watched quietly from the side as he went out to lure the enemy. Then, she turned around and drew a 4-ring magic circle on the pillar. She only finished when Brando killed the first enemy. At that moment, the pendulum golem ordered the clockwork swordsman to change its formation, exposing itself to Enrich's attack. However, Enrich didn't remember Brando ordering her to attack the pendulum golem. She looked around, chose a target, and pointed at number 7. A black bolt of lightning shot out from the magic circle on the pillar, and with a crackling sound, it hit the pendulum golem's head. Even though the pendulum golem's head was protected by a transparent magic circle, it was still knocked to the side. The pendulum golem's specialty was its high magic defense. However, Enrich didn't mind. A magic circle magician's specialty was the power of their spells. She didn't lower her finger. The first bolt of lightning was just a guide, leaving a magic mark on number 7's body. Then, the magic circle suddenly emitted a blinding black light, and more than 10 bolts of lightning shot out, all of them hitting number 7's head. For a moment, the transparent magic circle on number 7's head shone so brightly that it was almost solid. But in the end, it still shattered with a crack, like a walnut being smashed. The only difference was that it was still smoking. This spell was called Queen of Pain's Nine-Tailed Whip, a classic black magic spell. With number 7 dead, Brando's line of defense had a chance of survival. However, before he could celebrate, the pendulum golem threw out another card. Death Sentinels of Defeat. It said coldly, and a few doors of light opened behind it. Soldiers wearing black armor with spikes walked out from the doors. They looked like human soldiers. These soldiers held double-ended swords in their hands. Apart from their shoulders, helmets, and lower body armor, their upper body and lower abdomen were exposed. Their well-proportioned abdominal and chest muscles were a clear indication that they were skilled warriors. There were a total of 10 Death Sentinels. However, a door of light opened near the 2 broken clockwork swordsmen and the crystallized man. From each door, a Death Sentinel walked out. Although Brando didn't know what these NPCs were, he could guess that the pendulum golem's card wasn't just a creature card. It could also transform the dead soldiers on the battlefield into derivatives. Now that Enrich had taken down 2 more clockwork swordsmen, the situation had become even worse for Brando. Did you see that? A planeswalker doesn't even need a sword. You're a disgrace to the planeswalker team. Let me take care of you, the pendulum golem said expressionlessly with a strange metallic accent. Brando almost choked to death. This isn't the power of a planeswalker, it's just level suppression. If I was still LV-130, I wouldn't need to talk so much. I would have killed a piece of trash like you with a single strike. Planeswalker, planeswalker my ass. However, a warrior had the spirit of a warrior. Since he couldn't dodge, he decided not to. The 3 clockwork swordsmen in front of him were all gold tier. With Brando's current strength, if he fought seriously, these monsters wouldn't be able to do anything to him. However, the fact that there were 34 gold-tier monsters on the battlefield made his scalp tingle. The pendulum golem didn't seem to care about fighting himself. It raised its bronze staff and pointed forward. The army surged forward and surrounded Brando in 3 layers. Enrich, cover me! Brando shouted. With a carefree slash, he split a clockwork swordsman in front of him in half. The vampire girl glanced over, as if the battle had nothing to do with her. She replied impatiently, I know. She waved her small hand, and a magic formation drawn on the ground began to glow. A large black net fell from the sky, trapping half of the enemies within. This spell was called Abyssal Net. Of course, it was still a black magic. The enemies caught in the net would be slowed down, suffer pain, blind, deafened, and many other negative effects. In short, it was an IMBA spell. All magic formations were of this level. Otherwise, no one would be able to endure such a slow casting speed. As soon as the abyssal net was cast, Brando felt the pressure on him lessen greatly. The pendulum golem couldn't help but frown. This was the first time in its history that it showed an expression other than its expression. It looked back at Enrich and waved its staff. Two of the defeated Death Sentinels immediately left the battlefield and charged towards the girl. Under normal circumstances, a magician's first reaction would be to cast a defensive spell and retreat when a melee player approached. However, Enrich obviously didn't fall into this category. The vampire girl bit down on her thumb, and a drop of bright red blood oozed out from the tip of her finger. It was like a bright ruby in the snow. She waved her hand, and the blood spurted out from the wound, forming a crescent moon in the air. The crimson crescent moon shrank and changed shape in the air. As if it was controlled by someone, it turned into two bright red elven swords. Enrich caught the two swords with both hands. The swords in her hands looked like they were carved from gems, sparkling and translucent with the color of blood. Then, the girl took a step back. Her retreat showed her strength. Compared to her talent in magic, her strength as a warrior was between the peak of silver and the early stages of gold. However, the strange thing was that she could use the blood swords in her hands to form a magic circle. She could attack and cast spells at the same time. Both sides had only exchanged a few blows when the two defeated Death Sentinels' heads were covered in black clouds. Their foreheads were also flashing with green light. It was obvious that they had been inflicted with many negative statuses. The two warriors who were originally at the early stages of gold were weakened to the same level as Enrich, or perhaps even weaker. However, every time Enrich used her blood to form a magic circle, her face would turn paler. It was obvious that this vampire girl's blood magic circle was not without a price. She might even lose a portion of her HP if Brando saw that she was in a stalemate with the two defeated Death Sentinels and was worried that she couldn't handle it. He couldn't help but send a telepathic message to her. Lure them closer. Although he was also surrounded and beaten by 3 layers of enemies, he still couldn't bear to see the girls under his command being bullied by outsiders. However, he didn't expect Enrich's reply to him was only one word. Humph. It was as if she was being looked down upon. She was quite dissatisfied. She suddenly stopped and raised her right hand. The red light in her eyes intensified. She shouted, "Blood evaporation." Suddenly, the two Death Sentinels surrounding her let out a muffled groan. Countless droplets of blood seeped out from their bodies and spiraled towards Andrea's palm to form a ball of blood. In an instant, the ball of blood evaporated without leaving a single drop behind. The vampire maiden's face turned a little redder. Using the power of this attack, her movements became much faster. She decisively killed the two defeated Death Sentinels with one strike each. However, after using this ultimate move, the vampire girl was obviously unable to withstand it. She immediately used her 2 swords to support herself on the ground and panted heavily. It seemed that she could no longer participate in the battle. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Cheetian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 5:10. Without Enrich's protection, Brando felt the pressure suddenly increase. The abyssal net shone brightly above the heads of the enemies. The monsters caught in the net were like trash. Not only were their movements slow, they were blindly running around, and their HP was constantly being reduced. However, he could feel that the net's effect was gradually weakening. The spell's duration was about to end. At this moment, Enrich took the initiative to send a request to create a derivative. However, after some consideration, Brando rejected it. Low-level derivatives were meaningless in this kind of battle. The rejected vampire snorted coldly. Seeing that Brando was still resisting, the pendulum golem's eyes turned cold. It threw out another card. This time, a four-armed tall female wizard with metallic gray skin appeared on the battlefield. The female wizard was extremely tall, at least 2 heads taller than a normal human. She had a slender neck and no hair on her head. Instead, there were bundles of nerves. There were also strange patterns on her face and shoulders. Brando wondered if this was the Echelonious Spellweaver. However, he saw that she was holding a staff in one hand, while the other 3 hands were weaving mysterious runes. An invisible binding force was cast on him. However, before this invisible binding could do anything, it naturally disappeared. After being stunned for a moment, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. He thought to himself, "Blockhead, you're going to suffer this time. I'm immune to all spells below the 10th circle." However, before he could finish laughing, the pendulum golem threw out another card. Death Sentinel. A group of 10 soldiers in black armor walked out of a door of light. In addition, a death sentinel appeared beside every monster that had been killed. In an instant, the number of monsters on the battlefield had not only recovered, but also increased by half. Damn, is there an end to this? Brando looked at the cards in the pendulum golem's hand. He wanted to cry, but no tears came out. It had always been the players who had endless methods to wear down the boss. He did not expect to be the first player to be worn down by the boss' endless methods. Brando opened the Planeswalker system and placed his hand on a card. He was about to make a final gamble. However, at this moment, a woman's voice suddenly came from the darkness. "Pendulum monster, since when did you become the only one in charge here?" Brendel suddenly turned around and saw a pure white spear of light in the darkness. It struck the chest of a defeated Death Sentinel. The spear seemed to be extremely effective against dark creatures. Once it struck the Death Sentinel was burned to ashes in a flash. What was going on? Brando was stunned. Then, a tall lady walked out of the darkness, her entire body emitting a gentle white light. To be precise, it was a woman with the upper body of a human and lower body of a white deer. In the amber sword was called a banshee. This banshee had a pair of pure white feathers on her head. She held a spear of light in her hand. Her chest was wrapped in a corset, revealing her well-proportioned and strong waist. She pursed her lips, but there was a faint smile on her face. Her golden hair flowed down her back, making her look like a goddess. The banshee's body constantly emitted a gentle light that almost dispelled the darkness in the hole. She jumped to Brando's side, as if she was on his side. She raised her head and looked at the pendulum golem. "Pendulum monster, is he a planeswalker? How can you be so rude to our guest?" This sudden turn of events stunned Brando and Orthlis. Only Andrique remained unmoved. However, the pendulum golem obviously recognized this new woman. Its expression changed, and it said, "Humph, Ina, I don't care if you oppose me. I can't be bothered with you, but are you going to act like a traitor in front of outsiders?" "Ha!" The banshee called Ina laughed as if she had heard the funniest joke in the world. "What traitor? You're making it sound so serious." When the master set the ban, he only said that ordinary people were not allowed to enter. But this handsome young man here is a qualified apprentice. "Pendulum monster, do you want the master's legacy to be lost?" Brando felt that the people in this world had a special meaning when they talked about the legacy. Even the pendulum golem became more serious. It thought for a moment, but finally shook its head and said, "Master didn't say that he allowed it, so it's not allowed." After saying that, it prepared to attack again. "You're so stubborn. Forget it, let me enlighten you. I didn't have much hope in the beginning anyway." Although the banshee looked friendly, she was actually a violent person. She would attack at the slightest disagreement. Brendel's heart skipped a beat as he watched from the side. What's going on with these two? What's going on here? Isn't it strange enough that such a huge formation appeared in the nameless tomb? He quickly stopped the banshee called Ina and asked, "Wait, I want to know what's going on." Unfortunately, the banshee was huge, taller than Brando by more than a head. His hand was placed at a place where it shouldn't be. The banshee was slightly stunned. She looked down at the hand that was placed at a very awkward position. She couldn't help but smile. "What's wrong, little guy? Are you interested in where I am? Don't worry, after the fight, we can discuss this in private." Shameless bastard. Orthless snorted coldly in Brando's mind. "Brando, are you really going to discuss that kind of thing with her?" "Discuss my ass," Brando shouted in his mind. He rolled his eyes and said to the banshee, "Miss, I don't think we have anything to do with you, right?" Originally, that was the case. But since you are enemies with this pendulum golem, then I'm on your side. Come, let me help you defeat this pendulum golem. It has been here for too long, and its brain is completely rusted. Ina said confidently. What kind of weird logic is this? Brando was a little confused. However, there was no way he would believe her words. If she was telling the truth, would the pendulum golem still be so confident in its ability to beat up the pendulum golem? This banshee was obviously trying to rope him in as cannon fodder to avenge their previous grudge. Brando had seen this kind of plot many times before, so he wouldn't fall for it so easily. All right. Seeing that she could not convince him, the deer-bodied demoness shrugged. No matter what, this wooden fish head will not let you off. He will only calm down and talk to you after the two of us defeat this fellow. You should be able to accept what I said, right? Sly little guy. This reason was acceptable. Brando turned around and saw that the pendulum golem was ready to attack at any time. But he thought for a moment and replied coldly, "Yes, I can fight with you, but don't expect me to trust you too much. You sure talk big. But I'll do as you say, okay?" Ina giggled. She then asked curiously, "But aren't you afraid that I'll suddenly get angry and leave without helping you? You can't defeat this pendulum golem alone. Although it's a little old-fashioned, it's still very strong." Brando looked at her. Normally, he wouldn't talk so much with this kind of monster. But this time, he really needed her help. Also, he could vaguely sense a familiar aura from this banshee. He could also sense this aura from the pendulum golem. It was the aura of a planeswalker. But they weren't planeswalkers. Brando only suspected that they might have something to do with the planeswalker Kelsey's legacy. That was why he was patient enough to listen to so much nonsense. But he thought for a moment and replied, "Actually, it's fine if you leave. I've always believed in myself. Besides, it's not like I'm not its opponent." "Oh." Ina raised her eyebrows slightly, as if she was surprised. "Then I'll wait and see. If you're done talking, then come at me together." The pendulum golem coldly interrupted her. It snorted coldly, and the apprentice, who uses a sword, an animal that hasn't even fully matured, dares to claim that you can defeat me. What a joke. All right, Ina, let me teach you a lesson. I'll let you know the price of betrayal. As soon as the pendulum golem's metallic voice fell, it raised the bronze staff in its hand. A series of rustling noises could be heard coming from the ground. Metal beetles the size of human heads emerged from the ground. But when Brando took a closer look, he realized that they weren't metal beetles. Instead, they were metal constructs that looked like beetles. They had 3 pairs of sharp claws, and their bodies were like small metal balls. As soon as these metal beetles appeared, the metal gear that had been floating above the pendulum golem's head suddenly moved and began to spin. "Be careful," Ina whispered from the side, like a kind elder sister. "That pendulum golem's card is called Pitch Black Adversity. It's part of the Paradise of Adversity set. The metal ball above its head is the core card of the set. Using the special effect of the metal ball, it can link the entire set of cards together. Brando turned to look at her and suddenly asked, "Your card is called Paradise of Adversity, right?" Ina was slightly taken aback. She replied in surprise, "So you know about it?" She nodded proudly, "That's right." The deer-bodied demoness waved her hand, and 3 cards fell from the sky with white light. After the white light dissipated, a barefooted youth in a white robe with a trombone in his hand appeared beside her. On the other side, there was a holy white demonic book floating in the air. Finally, a row of soldiers in silver armor with spears in their hands walked out from the open door of light. Glorious Trumpeter, Tome of Life, Glorious Guardian. These are my cards. Ina pointed at her summons and introduced them one by one. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chitian. Calm to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 5:11. As soon as Ina's summoned creature appeared, the pendulum golem did not waste any time and immediately attacked. It raised its bronze staff, and a black screen of light appeared behind it. Shadows floated on the screen, emitting an aura of decay. At the same time, it pointed its chain-laden left hand at Brando, and a black ray of light flew towards him. "Be careful," Ina warned, "that's its barrier, destruction. This barrier will cause us to lose cards at a faster rate. That's an assassination spell. Can you deal with it?" Before she could finish, Brando had already displayed the mana drain spell. He took the spell and saw the card's effect: Assassination, Paradise of Adversity 13, Dark 5, Spell, Instant, Effect, target player sacrifices a divine artifact or creature. Assassination deals damage to target player, the amount of damage dealt is equal to the cost of the spell. This is a card that is only effective against planeswalkers, Brando thought to himself. He immediately targeted the gear ball on top of the pendulum golem's head. Unexpectedly, a faint barrier of light rose from the gear ball and blocked the spell. It was Enrolda's holy ring. The pendulum golem was willing to use a card to protect the gear ball. It seemed that the item was very important to it. The pendulum golem glanced at Brando. It probably did not expect Brando to have such a card. For a moment, it did not dare to cast any spells on Brando. At the same time, Ina also cast a ray of golden light, which broke through the black screen of light behind the pendulum golem. 2 people fighting side by side was much more advantageous than 1 person. At least in terms of casting speed, they had a huge advantage. However, the pendulum golem did not show any signs of nervousness. It pointed its finger, and the death sentinels charged forward. Ina and the pendulum golem were old rivals who had been at each other's throats for a long time. She was not surprised by the other's actions. She also waved her spear, and the glory sentinels under her followed suit. The Black Death sentinels had very little armor on their bodies, and they held sharp swords with barbs all over them. They moved very quickly, and it was obvious that they were highly aggressive and skillful warriors. On the other hand, the Glory Guards were the exact opposite. These white-helmeted and white-armored soldiers wore heavy armor and held long tower shields in their hands. Their weapons were halberds that could be wielded with one hand, indicating that they were experienced defenders in positional warfare. The 2 completely different colors clashed together, one attacking and one defending. It was hard to tell who had the upper hand. Although the Glory Wardens were few in number, the glorious martyr at the back was obviously a priest-type caster. Halos fell on the heads of the Glory Wardens, and the blessed Glory Wardens were able to overwhelm the defeated Death Sentinels in terms of battle prowess. They held their ground and pressed forward step by step. Soon, the pendulum golem's underlings were left with many corpses. The pendulum golem did not seem surprised by the outcome of the battle. It pointed its finger, and another spell enveloped the glorious guardians. This spell was similar to Enrich's abyssal web, but it was a thin layer of twilight chi. This layer of twilight chi enveloped the glory wardens' heads, and the glorious martyrs' blessing spells disappeared. Instead, they were replaced by weaken, slow, blind, and other negative spells. Inconsolable grief. This card can reverse all buffs. Helene explained as she released a ray of light. This ray of light shone on the glory wardens, and all the buffs and debuffs on the glory wardens disappeared. This was clearly a dispelling spell. However, Helene did not explain her card. Brando smiled inwardly. This woman looked very friendly on the surface, but she was actually a smart person. As soon as the two of them exchanged blows, all the buffs on the battlefield were cleared. The result of this exchange was that the glory wardens, who had fewer people, were at a disadvantage. The dear demoness was secretly anxious. She could not help but stomp her feet. She turned around and ordered the young man with the horn beside her, "Leno, blow the horn." The white-robed young man immediately stepped forward. He had beautiful curly hair and a sweet face, like an angel from the Bible. At this moment, he puffed up his red cheeks and blew the horn. The distant sound of the horn echoed throughout the underground hall, and the sound of flapping wings could be heard from afar. Soon, a platinum dragon flew through the darkness and landed on the battlefield. Damn, this horn can summon a dragon. Brando was shocked. Helene seemed to have seen through his thoughts. She playfully winked at him, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. It was obvious that she wanted to tease him. This made Brando grit his teeth in frustration. This dear demoness was really despicable. After blowing the horn, the young man named Leno seemed to have used up all his energy. His face was red as he slumped to the side. However, the platinum dragon he summoned was not as terrifying as a real dragon. It was not even an adult yet. Brando estimated that it was around level 60 or 70, which was the level of elemental activation. Of course, a mere level 70 or 60 was enough to defeat the Death Wardens. In the blink of an eye, the hall was littered with corpses. Most of the corpses belonged to the pendulum golem. Seeing this, Brando took a deep breath. He did not expect Helene to be so powerful. She was actually able to defeat the pendulum golem. However, he still insisted that things were not as simple as they seemed. As expected, after Helene gained the upper hand with her platinum dragon, she did not continue to attack. Instead, she suddenly ordered her summons to retreat. Brando did not question this order. He believed that the two of them understood each other well enough that they would not make such a stupid mistake. The pendulum golem threw out another vanquished Death Sentinel card, and the scene from before repeated itself. All the units on the battlefield were resurrected as vanquished Death Sentinels, and at the same time, there were 10 more of them. If Helene did not order her summons to retreat, they would be in the same situation as Brando. What the hell? Brando wiped the sweat off his forehead. This card was too cunning. After summoning the Death Wardens, the pendulum golem summoned an abomination to fight against the platinum dragon. This thing looked like a demon from hell, but its skin was green instead of red. Its entire body was covered in blue flames. To be honest, Brando had never seen a monster like this before. However, this thing was really powerful. It was able to fight evenly with the platinum dragon. Neither of them could do anything to the other. At the same time, the pendulum golem began to summon more Arachnia spellweavers. Soon, there were 4 of them on the battlefield. What is it doing? Brando was not in a hurry to attack. He wanted to see how the battle between planeswalkers went. Seeing this scene, he could not help but turn around and ask. He also had the Arachnia Spellweaver card, but it was a level 25 elite creature. He could not think of any reason for it to exist in this kind of battle. At this moment, Helene summoned another 2 Radiant Trumpeters. Her radiant trumpeters all looked similar. Their faces were so pure that it made Brando feel ashamed. Hearing Brando's question, Helene turned around and answered, "It's filtering." Filtering. Converting dark element to gather light element. Without the pure paradise, you have to rely on such a stupid method to gather light element. Pitch black adversity is indeed incomplete. When it came to the dignity of a planeswalker, the pendulum golem could no longer remain calm. It sneered, "Aren't you the same? The pure paradise is more than enough to defend itself. You're just waiting for death." The two continued to argue, but their hands did not slow down. Helene used the radiant trumpeters to summon two more powerful creatures. A white elephant covered in armor, and a giant eagle shining with the light of the heavens. Brando finally understood. The radiant trumpeters seemed to be able to place planeswalker cards into the battlefield for free at the cost of being horizontal. It did not know any summoning spells. Even so, it was still very strange. For example, the platinum angel in his hand cost almost 100 to enter the battlefield. He could not afford it. However, if he had the radiant trumpeters, wouldn't he be able to summon them for free? He did not know how much the radiant trumpeters cost. Brando thought that if the cost was too high, then this card would be useless. With the ability of the radiant trumpeters, the deer banshee had a clear advantage over the pendulum golem. However, the pendulum golem had its own tricks up its sleeves. It summoned creatures that resembled metal beetles, and after a certain period of time, they would replicate themselves. These beetles were capable of unleashing powerful lightning balls. Every time the pendulum golem unleashed a volley of lightning balls, a large number of the deer demoness summoned creatures would fall to the ground. Just as the pendulum golem said, the deer banshee's cards were more than enough for defense, but not enough for offense. If this continued, it was only a matter of time before she was defeated. What are those lightning balls? Why are they so strong? After watching for a while, Brando realized the problem. The metal beetles summoned by the pendulum golem were not very strong. At most, they were only level 20, not even reaching the silver tier. In this kind of battlefield, they were the cannon fodder of the cannon fodder. However, the lightning balls they cast were ridiculously strong. They were not any weaker than a peak silver tier. Although some creatures had ridiculously strong attacks, they would not be able to surpass several tiers. From Brando's point of view, this was similar to his Dragon Knight tactics. The wind spirit spiders were also very weak creatures, but through the holy sword techniques, they were able to unleash attacks that were several tiers above their own strength. Those lightning balls are the pendulum golem's magic card. As long as there is a nightmare creature on the battlefield, it can duplicate a lightning ball. That is one of the pendulum golem's two trump cards. Brando did not have the time to ask what the two trump cards were. Instead, he asked, "Nightmare creatures." It's that kind of metal beetle. Their scientific name is the Nightmare Furnace Construct. It's a construct created by the Furnace of Adversity in Arachnia. So that's how it is. Brando finally understood. The way these metal beetles operated was similar to his Dragon Knight tactics. No wonder they were so strong. But at this moment, Elaine frowned again. Not only that, the nightmare creatures can also duplicate themselves by devouring light elemental particles. Oh no, there are already so many of them. If we wait any longer, we will lose for sure. She suddenly realized that the pendulum golem had hidden a portion of the nightmare creatures behind its back. Damn it, that wooden fish is playing this trick on me. The deer banshee cursed. Only 2 chapters for today. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 5:12. After grumbling bitterly, the deer demoness turned around and sighed. Her expression was a little gloomy, actually, that pendulum monster was right. The pure white paradise is strong in defense but weak in offense. I have never won against it. Little guy, you've been watching for a while now. Isn't it time for you to make a move? Brando nodded. The green projection made his eyelids look like they were covered in a layer of fluorescent light. The data of the cards of fate quietly flowed on top of them. He placed his hand on one of the cards and gently pressed it down. He looked up and said, I can, but can you hold on for a little longer? Ina looked at him and said, then I'll try to reduce the number of nightmare furnaces. But the price will be high. She pointed her finger, and the platinum dragon flew towards the pendulum golem. Behind her, the abomination wielded its cold flame greatsword and slashed open her back. The platinum dragon let out an earth-shattering howl, but it still slammed into the ground. The pendulum golem did not dare to stop her. It could only let her be sucked into the nightmare furnaces. The difference between the nightmare furnaces and the platinum dragon was too great. In a single exchange, half of the nightmare furnaces were destroyed. But it did not come without a price. The devil who was burning with blue flames had already caught up to the platinum dragon. Golden blood flowed out from the wound on the platinum dragon's back, and it suffered another heavy blow. The abomination raised its two-handed greatsword and plunged it deep into the wound. Cold flames engulfed its heart. The beautiful creature raised its head, and Brendel could see the unwillingness in her eyes. She turned around and bit the devil's muscular neck. Unfortunately, she had already lost her strength, and the bite mark slid down, leaving only a shallow wound. She then fell heavily to the ground, lying quietly like a mountain in the middle of a glittering golden lake. Ina, that young man gave you an impulse that you didn't normally have. But if you let the platinum dragon leave too early, it will only hasten your defeat. The pendulum golem said coldly. Brendel suddenly felt that the dear demon beside him was unusually quiet. He raised his head and looked at the big sister next door. He gritted his teeth. I'm sorry. Brando said. It's all right. Irene sighed. It's that pendulum monster's rigid attitude that pisses me off. It's as if it can represent Master. Master isn't like that. The planeswalkers I know also have noble beliefs and perseverance. What's the point of having only calm calculations? He was nothing. I must teach it a lesson so that it knows where it is wrong. She clenched her fists as she spoke, and Brendel could see the unwillingness in her eyes that flickered with bright flames. For the first time, Brando felt that this lady was not so annoying. He placed his hand on his card once again. It was one of the cards in his hand. The color of the card was pitch black, as if it was the flame that burned the soul in the abyss. The eye-catching color was connected to some kind of contract. He placed his hand on the cold surface of the card, and a connection was established between the planeswalker and the rules. This card was not his only pure black creature card. On the card, there was a drawing of a dragon that was reborn from a skeleton, and the huge shadow carried a sense of death and decay. This was the graveyard rebirth. The shadow element flowed. Brando tapped Ruggan Swamp, water of the underworld, and forest of death. The water of the underworld produced 2 shadow element, and the forest of death produced 2 shadow element. A total of 5 shadow element flowed into his elemental pool. Then, the rules were pushed by the power of the elemental pool, opening the door to another world. The cards flew out from the graveyard. Brando glanced at the strongest card, the Fireclaw Lord, and the wind spirit spider that he used most often. He pulled out the whitest card, the pristine Archangel. The graveyard rebirth was like a black power that was injected into the card. The power of decay encouraged the corpse to stand up from the grave. With pitch-black wings, a pale body, and a slender head with blood-red eyes like honey, the pristine Archangel entered the game in the form of a black, spirit terracotta. A mercury ball with several brass orbits flew out from under Brando's cloak. Brando placed his thumb, index finger, and middle finger on the mercury ball, tapped it, and paid 5 fire element. The reflection of the archangel appeared in the eternal orb. The two archangels entered the game together, and their abilities were activated. When the pristine archangel enters the game, choose a non-black card from your graveyard and shuffle it into your deck. The Fireclaw Lord, Ropar, entered the game. The Wind Spirit Spiders entered the game. It was a magnificent scene. The green teleportation circle was like a star that covered half the sky, and the Wind Spirit Spiders appeared one after another. The first planeswalker to enter the underworld thousands of years ago, Brando summons, entered the game. The Pendulum Golem and Aina raised their heads to look at the army. "My lord, where is my enemy?" The Lizardman Lord, Ropar, held a flaming trident in his hand. His vertical prismatic eyes had a cold glint unique to cold-blooded creatures. When he glared at the Death Sentinels stopped in their tracks. Creatures of darkness were naturally afraid of fire. Even if they did not have intelligence, they would still succumb to their instincts. "So you still have powerful summons." The big sister's eyes flashed. "Great, attack those nightmare forges." "I'll defend, and you attack." "Little guy, as long as you can break through the defense of that clock monster, we still have a chance of winning. Attack the nightmare forges." Brando ordered. Ropar turned around and charged into the enemy formation. He was like a firestorm. Although he was only one tier higher than the Death Sentinels, his advantage was amplified due to the natural suppression of darkness. Most of the Death Sentinels were no match for him. Child's play. The Pendulum Golem gritted his teeth. He raised his hand and pressed the last Death Sentinel on the scale. The Death Sentinels on the battlefield had formed a black tide. The Pendulum Golem wanted to use numbers to make up for the difference in quality. However, before he could be proud, a large purple net fell from the sky. The Death Sentinels were instantly trapped in a quagmire. Andrique had finally recovered her strength. She rejoined the battle. Of course, the vampire girl was as cold as ever. It was as if this spell was nothing to her. The battle was in a stalemate. But soon, the abomination demon, burning with green flames, found its way to Ropar. Brendel's expression changed, and he knew something was wrong. Although the abomination demon was injured in the battle with the Platinum Dragon, it was still not something that Ropar could match with its elemental activation. He was about to send the two undead angels to distract the demon when he heard Helene say, "Leave that demon to me." She placed her hand on the Grimoire of Life and said, "Sacrifice." Brando was shocked. The Grimoire of Life was the core artifact of the pure heaven. It could restore the health and stamina of all allies on the battlefield. The dear Banshee relied on the Grimoire's continuous supply of energy to survive until now. If the Grimoire was destroyed and they could not win in a short period of time, defeat would be right in front of them. However, she was very resolute. She tore apart the Holy Grimoire without blinking. The power of the Holy Grimoire's sacrifice shone down a golden light from the sky. Within the range of this golden light, all the creatures that were originally on Helene's side that had died stood up in perfect condition. Even the Platinum Dragon was the same. It let out a long roar and flapped its wings, reviving on the spot in perfect condition. "Damn, I have faith in Brother Spring," Brando blurted out in his heart. However, when the dear Banshee turned her head, she frowned. "Without the Grimoire of Life, my deck has lost its core competitiveness. Defeat is right in front of us. But little guy, I have already fought for an opportunity for you. Can you break through the defense of the pendulum monster in a short period of time? If you can't, I think it's better for us to escape." However, Brando looked into the royal Banshee's eyes. His hand was on the hilt of the Halran Gaia, and he was a little hesitant. It was not that there was no chance, but he still had to wait for a while. "What are you waiting for?" The royal banshee was calmer than Brando imagined. She saw through his thoughts as a planeswalker. Are you waiting for a chance to draw a card? The next stage. Do you have a card in your deck that can win in one hit? A series of questions. The royal banshee's eyes lit up as she reacted. What a shrewd woman. Brando nodded. What are the chances? She was concise. Brando was waiting for the holy sword. He could see that the pendulum golem worshipped the power of a planeswalker. Although it was laughable, its own power was actually much stronger than the planeswalker power it was currently using. However, this gave Brando a chance. He had an idea. If he could defeat the core card of the pendulum golem's deck, then he and the royal banshee might be able to turn the tables in this battle of planeswalkers into victory. I have very few cards. There are basically no other cards in my deck. The chances of me drawing the card I want in the next stage is very high. This was his answer. The next stage still has 15 minutes. We won't be able to last that long. Damn it, I can't help you filter the cards. The dear banshee gritted her teeth. There's only one chance. If there's only one chance, then there's it. She suddenly said, look at my barrier. A white screen of light rose from behind the royal banshee. Accelerated thought, Paradise of Adversity 8, Level 22, Light and Darkness, Barrier, Effect. When a player casts a spell, the player draws 3 cards from the top of their deck. Before the next effect of Accelerated Thought, the player shuffles any cards that have more than 8 cards back into their deck. The advantage on the battlefield is to have the upper hand. Note, light and darkness represents light or darkness. A planeswalker can freely choose one to pay. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Calm to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 5:13. Accelerated Thinking, Paradise of Adversity 8, 22 halves Light and Darkness, Barrier, Effect. When a player casts a spell, the player can draw 3 cards from the top of their deck. Before the next effect of Accelerated Thinking, the player shuffles all cards from their hand back to their deck. The advantage on the battlefield is the advantage of having the initiative. As soon as the Barrier card appeared, Brando's eyes glowed. 2 cards appeared in his vision, 1 gray and 1 white. The gray one was the Holy Sword, and the white one was the War Horse. There were only 2 cards, because Brando knew that he only had these 2 cards left in his deck. A 50-50 chance, just like a left or right card, there was always a 50-50 chance of getting it right. He pulled out the card. This was the first card he had ever gotten since he came to this world. The Holy Sword represented a knight's firm belief, a sword that would rather break than bend. It was a sword that shined brightly in his soul. This sword had witnessed his journey, how he led the refugees of Fortress Reden to break through the encirclement, how he fulfilled his vow, how he took over the territory, how he fought a bloody battle, and walked on the path he had promised himself. His goal had always been in front of him, so the sword had never been sheathed. Now Brando's index and middle finger were gently placed on the card, like a knight polishing his sword under the light. The blade was like ice, shining with a cold light. He placed the card flat and announced, "Attach. Lady Elaine." Following Brando's words, it was as if a bright flame had been ignited in the deep starry sky. Golden light shone on the wind spirit spiders one by one. But looking up, it was as if a civilization had stepped into the darkness. On the vast land, the last thing that was left was a scroll of flickering flames. The intertwining flames weaved the future of the civilization. Enrolda's holy ring, how many cards are there? Brando asked. How beautiful. Aina looked up and praised from the bottom of her heart. Her eyes were as beautiful as the starry sky, especially when she smiled. Enrolda's holy ring, there are a total of 4 cards in the Paradise of Adversity deck. I have 2 of them, and so does the pendulum monster. The siren seemed to know why Brando asked this question, so she answered in detail. Shut up. How dare you reveal the details of Master's deck to an outsider? Elaine, your actions are going against Master's expectations. You have disappointed me. The pendulum golem interrupted her coldly. Big Sis raised her head and stared at the pendulum golem without saying a word. She used the brightest light in her eyes to express her stance. Pendulum golem, you do not represent the Master's opinion. The Paradise of Adversity has been sleeping for too long. It is time for it to have a successor, and not to sleep in this dark underground forever. The confrontation between the two only lasted for a moment. For thousands of years, they had never been able to convince each other, and today was no exception. But from Elaine's brief conversation, Brando had already obtained the information he wanted. Communicating with smart people was easy, and this was the first time he agreed with this view. His heart was calm, but there was also a flash of joy. The opportunity he had been waiting for was right in front of him. The pendulum golem had 2 Enrolda's holy ring, but one was already used during his counterattack, and the other was in his hands. Although he did not know how this card was attached to the crystallized letterer, Brando only needed to know the result. The holy sword had been ignited, and his target was the nightmare forges summoned by the pendulum golem. He wanted to destroy the cog while floating above the nightmare forges. But before that, Brando was cautious enough to test the waters. Even though he knew that the pendulum golem no longer had enrolled his holy ring, Brando did not mind being more careful. There were 2 ways to gamble. One was to press forward like a gambler who had lost so much that his eyes were red. The other was to carefully weave a large net and slowly close the gaps in the net. He held Halran Gaia in one hand, and looked at the brilliant flames pouring down from the sky. 1 pillar, 2 pillars, a golden river flowed down from the dome. Along the pillars of light were flames that burned the ground. The nightmare forges that were touched by the flames sizzled. The defense of these nightmare forges was terrifying. A single pillar of light was not enough to melt their outer shell. But when 2, 3, or even more golden swords converged on a single point, the nightmare forges could only scream as they melted into molten metal. The golden flames illuminated the pendulum golem's face. It seemed to have felt the difficulty of the situation for the first time. It propped its bronze staff on the ground, and the pendulum under its cloak ticked non-stop, as if it was thinking of a problem. Finally, it gave the order, and dozens of defeated Death Sentinels left the front line. They even ignored the pursuit of Elaine's summoned creatures, and turned to the golden pillars of light. It was a magnificent scene. Creatures that were born in the darkness were like moths, rushing towards the golden flames one after another. In the blink of an eye, they were reduced to ashes. Because of the order, even if it was only for a moment, they had to stop the advance of the holy sword. A moment was enough. The pendulum golem had already retreated the remaining nightmare forges at the last moment. You're crazy, pendulum golem. That's not how you use the cards of fate. Elaine couldn't help but frown. At the same time, she turned her head and whispered, that wooden fish head is already in a mess. Little guy, work harder. Victory is in sight. This woman. For the first time, Brando felt that women were contradictory creatures. But he nodded. Now was indeed the time to work harder. What do you know? The pendulum golem looked at them coldly. This is a planeswalker's chessboard. Every move has the most precise timing. Just like the flow of time, every minute, every second. This is the most beautiful art that Master has taught us for thousands of years. But you don't understand. Today, I will show you why this deck is called the Adversity deck. The pendulum golem's words made Brando raise his eyebrows slightly. He raised his head and looked at the pendulum golem's expression. It wasn't the kind of dejection that came from losing, but rather a determination that grew stronger as the battle went on. Brando frowned. This was not the expression of someone who was about to lose. Could it be that the pendulum golem still had a trump card? He didn't dare to be careless. The probing was already over. The pendulum golem even wanted to use creature cards to block his holy sword. This was undoubtedly the signal for the final attack. He raised his gaze, and the wind spirit spider followed suit. The golden sword in the air was aimed at the pendulum golem's cogwheel. One hit to defeat the enemy. I order my summons to press forward. At the same time, the dear demoness also gave the order to attack. The pendulum golem's expression was as calm as ever. It was as if it would never admit defeat until the very last moment. It raised its bronze staff, and the death sentinels fell one by one in front of it. At the same time, the Aronian spellweavers that had been drained of their energy stood up once again. The pendulum golem was regenerating the spellweavers and absorbing new light elements for it. The nightmare forges were growing again. Not good. Irene's eyebrows furrowed. It's sacrifice. This is the power of the Aronian furnace of adversity. This bastard is accelerating the cycle. It really doesn't want to live anymore. Hurry up and limit the number of nightmare forges it can summon. However, Brando couldn't stop now. The golden beam had already locked onto its target. He was focused on destroying the cogwheel. As long as the core was destroyed, the pendulum golem wouldn't be able to summon any more nightmare forges. Victory or defeat would be decided here. He didn't believe that the pendulum golem had any more tricks up its sleeve. The cogwheel dodged in midair, but the rain of steel was slowly extending. It was only a hair's breadth away from hitting its target. However, Brando didn't expect that a wall would suddenly appear between him and victory. This wall was the pendulum golem, who had a cold expression on his face. The pendulum golem stood in the middle of the flames, looking at Brando and the dear demoness with contempt. But what really made Brando's eyes widen was that the pendulum golem had taken the initiative to dispel its magic defense, taking the hit with its health points alone. The flames burned through its cloak in an instant. Half of the pendulum golem's body was reduced to ashes, but it did not show any signs of pain. Its right hand was still tightly gripping the bronze staff that was propped up on the ground. "You're crazy." The dear demoness was shocked. She couldn't help but scream. She didn't expect the pendulum golem to be so ruthless. But what she couldn't understand was why the pendulum golem would take the initiative to dispel its magic defense. As a companion who had followed the great master for thousands of years, she knew the power of the pendulum golem. If the pendulum golem had used all its strength to block the attack, it shouldn't have taken any damage. But the dear demoness' scream was only met with a contemptuous smile. The pendulum golem's broken body stood among its summoned creatures. It smiled contemptuously. Although its body was on the verge of collapse, its smile was full of disdain for its enemy. "Looks like you've forgotten the first lesson our master taught us, Irene. When it comes to deciding the outcome of the game, planeswalkers have to sacrifice themselves to protect their most important and fragile cards on the field. If you don't include yourself in the game, then you will lose one of your most important chess pieces. Now, you've lost." The pendulum golem raised its chin proudly. Behind it, there were more than 40 nightmare forges. These were its last assets. At this moment, the cogwheel above its head began to spin rapidly. It slowly grew bigger and bigger until it formed an unimaginably large steel door. Behind the door, a gigantic silhouette gradually appeared. It was a hill that seemed to be floating in the air. Infinitely distorted thoughts and bizarre bodies combined and mutated on the hill, forming a chaotic scene that was eternally changing. The hill seemed to have some kind of life. It floated there, but everyone present could feel a chilling gaze from the top of the hill. Brando's face paled when he saw this thing. This was the legendary ancient abomination, one of the most powerful abominations in the twilight of legends, Imoku the Eternal Wraith. Note, Imoku the Eternal Wraith, Paradise of Adversity XXI. NE 500. Creature, Legendary Creature Orzak. Effect, Imoku the Eternal Wraith is immune to all physical attacks. When you cast Imoku, the flow of time will be halved. Flight. Anti-colored spell protection. Immune to all elemental spells. Annihilation 6. When Imoku is placed into a graveyard from any place, its owner shuffles the graveyard into their deck. Anti-colored spell protection, immune to all effects of colored spells, requires light, darkness, nature or any of the four elements. Requires light, darkness, nature or any of the four elements. Requires light, darkness, nature or any of the four elements. Creature cards cannot deal any damage. Annihilation 6. Every time Imoku the Eternal Wraith attacks, 6 cards of creature, artifact, earth or any other permanent type will be removed from the target's hand. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Cheedian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 5:14. When the pendulum golem revealed its final trump card, Aina was trembling with anger. She glared at the pendulum golem. Very well, pendulum golem. But you don't have to remove your defenses. You damned bastard, do you not want to live anymore? Is your brain filled with water-retarded idiots? The pendulum golem's body emitted cracking sounds, but it still looked down at its companion. Elaine, this is the Planeswalkers' war. It has been going on since the beginning of the era. You must learn to respect it. This is the world my master has been searching for his entire life. Beings like my master would never use anything other than the laws of fate, because we are in awe of the laws of fate. It shook its head. I admit that my body is strong, but on this battlefield, I don't think I'm any different from you. You're crazy. Ina stomped her feet in anger. She pointed at the pendulum golem and screamed, very well, pendulum golem, you will regret this. No matter what, I will defeat you this time. I will trample your so-called false pride to the ground, you idiot. Planeswalkers, let us defeat this bastard together. Brando looked back at Ina. He more or less understood the source of her anger. The incomplete pendulum golem stood there proudly, but it was at the end of its life. Although the two of them had fought against each other for thousands of years, they were more like friends with different ideals than enemies who would not rest until one of them was dead. But Ina would never have dreamed that this damned pendulum golem was serious. She felt disheartened, but her heart was filled with an indescribable grief. She looked back at Brando with an apologetic gaze and said, Planeswalkers? Brando looked up at the sky, or rather, into despair. The giant shadow behind the door was a legend, one that had left its name in the amber sword. It was the destroyer of the Golden Lands, the undefeatable abomination of the dusk, and was a product of the same era as the divine people. Emrakul, the eternal trauma, could suffocate people with just his aura alone. We can't defeat eternal trauma. Brando understood what eternal trauma represented. I also have a Destiny Dual Ground card. It's a colorless divine artifact card that can affect the trauma of all ages. I can only give you half a minute, no, 20 seconds at most. Can you defeat that pendulum monster? Irene took a deep breath. You mean? Brando's eyes flashed. He couldn't help but look at the remaining creatures of the pendulum golem, 3 heavily injured demons, a few defeated death sentinels, and a bunch of nightmare forges. However, he was unable to deal with the 3 heavily injured demons, not to mention the 40 nightmare forges in the pendulum golem's hands. To be honest, running away and admitting defeat was the best choice. However, Brando found it difficult to speak when he saw the bright eyes of this big sister in front of him. I don't know. It's very difficult, and I'm not sure. He changed his words when he was about to say it. This was not what he wanted to say. It's all right. I'll leave it to you. No matter the outcome, I hope you can help me. I'll owe you one. She raised her head and looked at the pendulum golem, a bright flame dancing in her eyes. No matter what, I have to give it a try. This may be the last time, but I don't want to leave behind any regrets. I understand. Brendel nodded his head. Being trusted by someone always made him feel energized. He once again placed his hand on the card. The pendulum golem looked at the scene like a bystander. It did not say a word as it waited for Ina and Brando to make their final struggle. Under its control, Eternal Trauma Imoko entered the arena. Its aura filled the arena, and the soldiers on the field all paled. Only Andrik remained unmoved. Ina also looked at the pendulum golem one last time. She then threw the destiny dual ground at Eternal Trauma. A golden halo enveloped her, her summons, and the giant creature. Brando realized that the halo could block vision, as if Ina and the terrifying creature had disappeared into another dimension. This was good. Brendel heaved a sigh of relief when the pressure on the stage disappeared. He now had Ropar, 2 spirit figurines, countless wind spirit spiders, holy sword, and Endrik. How to fight? That was the problem. He still had Sprint Drive, Golden Battle Flag, Rune Summoner, and Vampire Baron cards, but none of them seemed to be of any use. The most reliable card was Vampire Baron. Its abilities should be able to complement Endrik's, but he did not have any dark element on him. A second had passed while he was thinking. He raised his head and saw the pendulum golem looking at him. Angels had the ability to fly, and could directly cross the battlefield. However, they were too weak. They were only level 20 elites, and could not be of much use. Endrik and Ropar did not have the upper hand against one demon. His only advantage was that the Wind Spirit Spiders and Holy Sword's firepower was much denser than the Nightmare Forge's lightning balls. But he still had to face 2 more demons. Even if he counted himself in, he might not be able to turn the tables. Brando's expression did not change, but his mind was racing. He could not see any chance of winning, but time was running out. Forget it, Brando raised Halran Gaia, took a deep breath, and roared, "Attack!" The dazzling golden pillar of light smashed into the Nightmare Forges, and at the same time, countless lightning balls exploded in the air. One by one, the Nightmare Forges turned golden red, exploded, and turned into a pool of molten iron. Golden lightning flashed in the sky, and the Wind Spirit Spiders fell to the ground like rain. In this rain, the Death Sentinels, demons, and Brando's summons clashed. A golden light flashed across the battlefield, and Brando linked Sprint to Endrik and Ropar. The 2 of them clashed with a demon, and the power of the card instantly decapitated the demon. At the same time, Brando also met a strong opponent. The abomination that had fought with the Platinum Dragon and wielded a green flaming greatsword stopped him. This demon was at least close to the Platinum Angel's strength and level. It swung its sword, and the sound of the wind was ear-piercing. Brando did not dare to take it head-on. He took a step back and let the illusion of the 9 luminaries sword behind the wind sword catch the sword. The illusion was swept away and disappeared in the air, but the abomination's greatsword also paused. Brando, who had rich combat experience, seized this fleeting opportunity to activate charge. He stepped on the greatsword's blade and jumped over the demon's head with a somersault. Brando quickly moved in the air, and the 9 luminaries sword behind the wind formed 3 illusions at the same time. The 3 illusions all inherited all of Brando's combat experience. As they rolled in the air, they stabbed their swords into the abomination's head. But the abomination was not inferior to Veronica's level, and it let out a violent howl as it retracted its sword. It swung its sword upwards, and a series of clanking sounds rang out, and all of Brendel's illusions were knocked away. But at this time, Brando was already behind it. He raised the Halran Gaia and slashed at the demon's back with a roar. The demon had the element of steel, and the element power formed a layer of metal on the surface of its body. With the sharpness of the Halran Gaia, it made a loud sound like metal clashing with metal. The Halran Gaia bounced off and only left a shallow white mark on the demon's back. However, Brando's attack was far from over. The 9 luminaries soared behind the wind formed 7 illusions in succession. Clang, 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 clang. The 7 swords hit the same spot one after another. The last sword finally embedded itself in the demon's back. The demon's unique blue-purple blood splashed out, and the monster suddenly let out a miserable cry. "What the hell are you screaming for? I used to kill a character with 1 sword. I didn't expect it to be so troublesome to deal with now." Brando couldn't help but curse in his heart because he found that his sword was embedded in the demon's back and couldn't be pulled out. At this time, the second demon had arrived and raised its great sword to stab at him. "Sir Overlord," Ropar reminded. This was the vampire girl's inquiry, meaning to ask if he needed help here. "Don't worry about me, you guys go kill that pendulum monster," Brando roared. With the 2 demons attracted to him, this was his only chance. He didn't let go of the sword hilt in his hand and took the attack from behind. With a squelch, the demon's flaming greatsword almost pierced through half of his body. Ah! At that moment, Brando felt that his organs were about to burn. Elemental level existences were terrifying, and this one sword instantly took over his life. The unyielding element immediately took over his body, and his vision was blood red, filled with the warning words of low life. Brendel gritted his teeth and activated the berserk skill to its fullest. The power of the inheritance from the dark dragon instantly exploded, doubling his attributes and increasing his power output. He howled and pulled out Halran Gaia from the devil's back, the blade still stained with blood and muscle tissue. Brando's eyes were red, and he swung the sword with all his strength. The demon behind him probably never dreamed that a mere human's fighting style would be so violent, and the sword swept across its cheek. The piercing skill instantly activated, and 9 luminaries soared behind the wind 3 times in a row. The demon's face exploded like a smashed eggplant. It didn't have the iron element. The system notified Brando that he had received 53,460 EXP. This notification was laughable because Brando wasn't in the mood to care about it. He had taken care of his biggest threat with a single slash, but his body was already on the verge of collapse. He stood in the middle of the battlefield like a man of blood, dragging the Halran Gaia with one hand and drinking a bottle of No. 7 holy water with the other. The holy water could heal wounds, but it couldn't heal the weakness caused by excessive blood loss. Brando panted heavily as he watched the other demon turn towards him. Both were injured, and both were in a state of rage. But Brando didn't lose his mind. He slowly retreated, trying to distance himself from the demon. At the same time, his attention was on Enrich and Ropar. The 2 of them had already closed in on the pendulum golem, and victory was in sight. However, a black light flashed in the pendulum golem's hand, and another demon entered the battlefield. This demon looked exactly like the one Brando had just killed. This guy could even loot tombs. Brando's last glimmer of hope turned into despair. He had played all his cards, but he was still one step behind. At this point, he could only try his best and leave no regrets behind. At least he could give the dear Demonis an explanation. To be honest, he didn't feel any hostility towards the pendulum golem. At least the pendulum golem's perseverance had earned his respect. He couldn't blame anyone for being inferior. All that was left was the final struggle. Brando didn't want to leave any regrets behind. He looked at his hand. There was only the Vampire Baron, Rune Summoner, Silver Colt, and Golden Battle Flag left. The Vampire Baron couldn't be summoned, and the rune summoner's level was too low. The silver colt wasn't of much use either. But when he saw the golden battle flag, he was slightly stunned. Speaking of which, he suddenly remembered that this card had been with him for quite some time. This was one of the cards that Tumen had given him. He had used most of the cards in that set, but it was funny to say that he had never used this card. Because this card was just too trashy. It required 5 light EP, but it could only upgrade all the summons by 1 level. What was the use of 1 level? It was no different from not upgrading at all. And 5 light EP was a huge cost to him. He didn't have many cards that could provide light EP. Usually, Brando wouldn't even look at this card. But this time, when he looked at this card, he was stunned for the first time. Because this card that he had never paid attention to before. The card number was Cities Alliance I. Brando now knew that the first card number of the card was the core card of the set. This card is a core card. Brando felt that there must be something wrong. How could a card that could upgrade by 1 level be a core card? He couldn't help but think about the Cities Alliance card. It seemed like this set of cards was scattered. For example, the Mercenaries of Lopez, Prosperous Gold Mine, or Sprint Drive. There didn't seem to be any powerful cards in this set. Forget about the Paradise of Adversity, this set couldn't even be compared to the Flaming Tribe or the Wonders of Creation. He was stunned, but it was a race against time. He didn't have much time to think. Whether or not this card was a core card, it could upgrade all the summons on the field by 1 level. That was enough. Brando didn't want to have any regrets. He took out this card and prepared to display it. But at that moment, the pendulum golem's poker face changed for the first time. It looked at Brando in disbelief. It couldn't even hold the bronze staff in its hand, and it fell to the ground with a clang. You! It roared unwillingly. Me? Brando was shocked. He looked at the pendulum golem with a wronged expression. What did I do? The pendulum golem pointed at the card in Brando's hand. It was shocked. Secret rare card. How can you have a secret rare card? This is impossible. You're just an apprentice. If it wasn't for the pendulum golem's expression, Brando would have thought that it was toying with him. It was obvious that the pendulum golem had the upper hand, but now it looked as if it could see that he was about to lose. Even when Brando was at his most confident, the pendulum golem didn't have such an expression. He couldn't help but look at the golden battle flag in his hand. He was confused. He couldn't tell how strong this card was. But Brando was a smart guy. He saw the pendulum golem's expression and knew that something was wrong. Even though he didn't know what the problem was, Brando still decided to display the golden battle flag. And then, in that moment, a square flag with the emblem of a holy white city appeared in his hand, flickering with golden light. Brando held Halran Gaia in one hand, his body bathed in blood, and the golden battle flag in the other. He stood in the middle of the battlefield, bathed in the light of the flag. For a moment, he looked like a general on the battlefield. But at that moment, a miracle happened. Wherever the light shone, Brando saw that all the summoned creatures, allies on the battlefield had changed. Ropar's body suddenly grew bone plates. These bone plates surrounded him, forming a full body armor with sharp fangs. The flame trident in his hand turned into a golden-red halberd covered with mysterious runes. The Fireclaw Lord's body was covered in flames. Brando could tell at a glance that it was the sign of elemental awakening. High-level fire elemental awakening. At the same time, Andrique's evening dress turned into an even more luxurious princess dress. She was also wearing a matching battle armor. An exceptionally exquisite black breastplate and gauntlets. Her boots also turned into high-heeled iron boots. The vampire girl's eyes were green and red, burning with raging flames in her battle state. She had also awakened her elemental awakening. And the most ridiculous thing was the wind spirit spiders. Brando looked back, but there were no more spiders in the sky. It was clearly a swarm of wind spirit spiders flapping their wings. This was a type of pseudo-dragon. Even though they were only level 30, wasn't this number a little too ridiculous? And what was with the holy sword technique? Brendel looked on helplessly as the holy swords in the sky turned into golden dragon armor suitable for these pseudo-dragons. Brando was stunned. Could leveling up by one level have such a huge effect? Was it just a dream that he had been knocked out by that demon? Or did he open the Planeswalker system wrongly? But before he could take a look at the Planeswalker system, he heard a shocked howl. The flag of the Bullyman family. The alliance of the city. Planeswalker Tumen. Pendulum Master's face was about to crack. He stared at Brando with a murderous gaze. You are Tumen's apprentice. At this time, Brando was also stunned. Because he opened the Planeswalker system, in that moment, he understood the true use of the golden battle flag. Because he saw that the wind spirit spiders, holy sword, and Fireclaw Lord cards had turned silver, and Enrich's card had turned into a sparkling gold. At this moment, there were only 10,000 voices echoing in Brando's mind. F***CK, so this is what leveling up means. F***CK, this doesn't make sense. F***CK me. What a tragedy. I don't know why I thought of the Turing test when I was writing, but I wrote Tumen as Turing. I immediately kneeled. I'll change it now. Also, this chapter has a lot of words, I can't guarantee there will be more at night. Finally, there's a problem with the explanation of the anti-colored spell. It should be to avoid being the target of the colored spell, and be immune to all colored damage effects. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Cheatian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 5:15. The golden battle flag fluttered in the underground hole. The dazzling radiance on the golden flag not only dispelled the surrounding darkness, but also washed away the shadows like the first rays of the morning sun. It even outlined the fine lines of the silver magic formation on the marble floor. Andrea, Ropar, the pristine angel, and the wind spirit drake were bathed in the light. They witnessed the pendulum golem's last line of defense crumble like a dark border disappearing in the light. But the true victory was not Brando's final attack. The pendulum golem still had the strength to fight. The level 60 to 70 abomination demons still had the upper hand against Ropar and Enrich, who had just awakened their elements. But the pendulum golem had already collapsed. It was like a shaky building collapsing with a loud crash. Bathed in the holy light, the pendulum golem squinted its eyes. It suddenly felt that the entire world was deviating from its original path. And in this deviation, it fell heavily to the ground. Brando witnessed this scene. At that moment, he suddenly understood that the pendulum golem could not hold on any longer. It was only relying on its stubbornness to defend its final door. But this stubbornness finally collapsed when it realized that it could not reverse the situation. The sword-wielding demons burst into flames in front of Brando's army of summons. A blue flame burst out from their bodies, turning them into ashes in the blink of an eye. Not far away, a golden halo lit up on the ground. Within the halo, Aina and her scattered summons appeared. The terrifying ancient abomination Imoku was nowhere to be seen. However, when she turned around, the first thing she saw was the pendulum golem on the ground. Her face was filled with emptiness. When Brendel saw this scene, he knew that she must be feeling terrible. The pendulum golem lay on the ground. The ticking sound under its cloak became weaker and weaker. It did not say a word, and no one knew what it was thinking. Its spells and summons disappeared with its fall. The traces of its existence were like an illusion, eventually turning into white ashes. Ina walked over. Her eyes were red as she knelt down beside the pendulum golem. Damned wooden fish head, why are you doing this? I really don't understand you, you idiot. In order to protect my master's rules. The pendulum golem muttered, its metallic voice rising and falling. Master's every step is necessary. If he cannot defeat me, I will kill him. I can't let down such a great sacrifice. Planeswalkers, we can't afford to make a mistake. The royal sister couldn't help but fall silent. Do you have to die before you can acknowledge him? Are you satisfied? You're going to die now, you pendulum monster. You clearly know that he is the planeswalker, the first planeswalker to enter this place in thousands of years, and also the last one. Why would you do something so pointless? You idiot, you moron. The dear demoness suddenly cried out as she lay on the pendulum golem's body. It's precisely because I'm the last one that I have to be even more cautious. Master has also left. Then, what do I have to miss? The pendulum golem's voice seemed to come from its broken body. Ina, you don't understand. How? I wish I was a planeswalker. Brando stood silently beside the two. His summoned creatures had already returned to stand behind him. Although he had defeated his opponent, for some reason, Brando didn't feel the slightest bit of joy. This victory was an accident. Brando himself wasn't prepared to accept this victory. Rather than a victory, it was more like a loss. However, the pendulum golem didn't seem to care about the result. It glanced at Brando, its expression still cold. I don't trust you, young man. You don't know what a real planeswalker is like. But I hope you won't disappoint me. It shook its head, let out a final sigh, and then became silent. For a moment, only the sound of the dear-bodied banshee crying could be heard in the hole. After crying for a long time, the banshee finally calmed down. She lowered her head and thought for a while, then turned back to look at Brando. The frivolous expression from before had already faded from her face. You must want to know something, right? She asked. Brando first shook his head, then nodded. It wasn't that he hadn't seen similar scenes in the game. Won's main storyline was about civilization fighting against fate. The ancestors created history step by step, not through laughter, but through blood and sacrifice. He had seen too many of such heavy storylines. But after thinking for a long time, he finally asked, You actually want to save it, right? The banshee didn't speak. After a while, she replied, I'm sorry, I didn't want to use you. I'm not blaming you for that, Brando shook his head. It's fine. When the banshee heard that it was fine, she suddenly felt a little warm in her heart. She looked at this human again, and felt that her feelings were understood. This made her feel a little better. But her companion who had accompanied her by the river of time was now lying beside her, no longer having thoughts. Once, when she saw this old-fashioned face, she remembered the time when she was still adventuring with her master. It was so clear that it was like yesterday. But now, this last nostalgia was gone. The banshee couldn't help but fall silent again, as if she was choked with sobs. After a long time, she said with some difficulty, I've made a fool of myself in front of you, little one. Now, can you tell me what happened here? Brando nodded, then asked, This tomb, this underground hall, and the magic circle on the ground, and your master is the planeswalker Kelsey, right? Helene nodded. The pendulum monster and I are master's summoned creatures. We were once cards of fate. Master brought us to travel through several worlds, starting from a place called Donder Cash, the kingdom of Hyarza. The pendulum monster was Master's first creature card. It followed Master much earlier than me, but I was Master's most capable assistant. Because when it comes to planning, I was much better than that wooden fish head. The Banshee seemed to be reminiscing about the past, and couldn't help but smile proudly as she said this. Traveling wasn't always the same. We experienced many interesting things. There were battles, love, and friendship. But as Master traveled from one world to another, time passed, and Master became older. Traveling was no longer as simple as it was at the beginning. Our opponents also became stronger and stronger. Master seemed to be searching for something. But both of us didn't know what it was. It knew more than me. Master seemed to be fighting against a powerful existence. In the end, we came to this place, Woned. After an earth-shattering battle here, Master stayed here. From then on, they worked on the magic circle below us. It took a total of 10 years before it was finally completed. The tomb outside was just a cover to hide the work below. The owner of the tomb was a noble. I remember that he was a very interesting young man. But after a few decades, he died of an illness and was buried in this tomb. Brando listened attentively. He knew that Woned was just a general name for the world in which the game was set. But in fact, the Amber Sword's worldview was beyond imagination. Although since the beginning of the Second Era, people had always known that there were other worlds behind the fog behind the dark forest. Those were worlds that were as big as Woned and were guarded by Martha. But other than planeswalkers, no one could travel between these worlds. So legends were just legends. And then Master chose to hibernate here. Master did not die because his lifespan ran out. In fact, a planeswalker's lifespan is almost endless. Because he was too injured, he had to choose this place as his final resting place. Before he could rest, Master gave me and the pendulum monster life, allowing us to become physical beings with a part of his power. But after all, we were not real planeswalkers. Master's final task was to guard this underground hall and not let any mortals enter. Until one day, someone with his power appeared. And this person, Ina raised her head and looked at Brando, is you. Me? Brando thought that it could not be so coincidental. The so-called quests in the Amber Sword all required certain conditions to trigger. Especially the player's experience. For example, if a player from Madara went to find Amandina with a letter from her father, even if they found her, she might not necessarily follow Madara's side. Because of the NPCs themselves and some other factors, they were selective in how they carried out the quests. But he felt that perhaps this was not a coincidence. If it was not for the cards of fate, he would not have come here. And if he was not a planeswalker, he would not have any interest in the cards of fate. So there was fate in the world, and some coincidences were not really coincidences in the long run. So then, what is the purpose of this hall? We don't know exactly what it is used for. But Master was very cautious about it. I only know that in order to build this hall, other than Master, there were two other powerful beings who sacrificed their lives. Ina thought carefully and replied. Two powerful beings, were they planeswalkers? No, Ina shook her head, but I have seen one of them. She was very powerful, not inferior to my master. Brando sucked in a breath of cold air. An existence that was as powerful as a planeswalker, what kind of concept was that? If Kelsey could summon the projection of Imoku, the eternal trauma, his strength would have far surpassed any of the powerful beings that Brando had seen in his 2 lives. And from the Darkness Dragon's tyranny to the War of the Holy Saints until now, Brando could not think of any legendary existence that had such a level of strength. Unless it was the Darkness Dragon himself, but the Darkness Dragon was not a woman. Taking 10,000 steps back, what was the point of sacrificing 3 existences of Kelsey's level to construct a hall like this? Brando did not think that it was just to leave behind the inheritance of the paradise of adversity. There must be some secret hidden below. But looking at Ina's expression, it did not seem like she was lying to him. Maybe they really did not know what was below. Can you remember when you came to Wound, which era was it? Brando thought for a while and asked again. Ina thought carefully for a while. This period of history was quite old for her, and it was not easy to remember. Well, I don't know if their method of counting back then was the same as the one you are familiar with now. When we came to this world with Master, according to the local method of counting, it should be the year 540 Orcus. Brando was stunned. The people of Cruz began to count the years with the method of counting, which was already a distant history. It was said that when the Azure Night shattered the sky and brought about the Second Era, this new method of counting the years began to spread. The person who created this method was said to be the most outstanding sage of the Myrna people, Tumen. At the same time, Brando now knew that he was also a planeswalker. But this theory was not very tenable, because according to the research of scholars, the new method of counting the years was recorded much later, and could only be traced back to the era of the War of the Holy Saints. But no matter which one it was, he had never heard of a method of counting the years like Orcus 540. Well, I admit that I have never heard of such a method of counting the years. Brando sighed and shrugged. He thought for a while and said, then in the history of that time, are there any famous people you know? The woman who came here with Master is one of them, but I don't recognize her name. There was another person at that time, and you should know this person. He was also a planeswalker like Master, but much more powerful than Master. Little guy, you have inherited this person's legacy. Tumen. Brando almost jumped up. Tumen. Martha above, when you came to Wound, it was the era when Tumen was still alive. How many years ago was that? It should be about 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. Wait. If I remember correctly, the Darkness Dragon Odin wasn't dead at that time, right? Brendel pressed his forehead with one hand and felt a slight pain in his temples. If I remember correctly, the Darkness Dragon Odin wasn't dead yet, Odin. Ina looked at him and said, I have heard of this name. Correction of a mistake. Fireclaw Lord Ropar's card was originally a silver rare card, and I described it as a normal card yesterday. So after upgrading, it should be gold. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 5:16. Tumen said that they had a supreme leader in the north, and he and the powerful woman followed him. That person was called Odin. They had been fighting against the cultists and the demons that had spread from the scorching hell to the surface. These people were also my master's enemies, so my master agreed to join the war. The war lasted for decades, until the last Great War. That should be the last few wars between the Dark Dragon and the cultists. At that time, the Twilight Dragon had been defeated by the Azure Knight in the sky, and the power of chaos had been restrained. After the war, Odin unified the whole of Wound. The people who sacrificed their lives thought that they had gained hope, but they did not expect that the dark and cruel rule had just begun. Orthla suddenly said in Brando's mind, as if she was a little emotional. If not for that, there would not have been the War of the Holy Saints, and there would not have been the 4 sages. Because of one person, countless people died in vain. He was once a hero, and I have no reason to hate him, but I still can't forgive his actions. Brando nodded silently. He knew this part of history. The Azure Knight shattered the sky and brought about the Second Era, but the first 10 centuries of the Second Era were still covered in darkness. It was said that Madara, the witches, and the Myrnas were the remnants of the Dark Dragon, and they were also the main enemies that Brando faced in the game. Although he had coincidentally received Odin's inheritance, he still held some grudges in his heart. Orthla sensed Brando's thoughts, and she was secretly shocked by this young man's knowledge of history. The history that she spoke of was already unknown to the present day, and only the wizards of the Silver City who buried themselves in scrolls all day long might know about it. However, Brando was not surprised when he heard this. These details that he had inadvertently revealed had already made Orthla slightly suspicious. Legend had it that the Dark Dragon could see through people's hearts and understand everything. This was an ancient prophecy of the witches, and Orthla knew about it. She knew that Brando now had the blood of the Dark Dragon flowing in his body, and she could not help but wonder if this was really just a coincidence. But Brendel had already understood the cause and effect of the war. He raised his head and looked at the ceiling of the underground hall that was gradually hidden in the darkness, and his curiosity grew even stronger. Beside him, Helene seemed to have seen through his thoughts. She hesitated for a moment, but since Brando had already been acknowledged, she said, "Little guy, if you really want to know the secret of this place, I'll take you to a place." Brando turned around. Helene said the place was the pendulum golem's body, but she said she wanted to take care of the pendulum before she could bring Brando. Brando did not object, and only waited silently at the side. Towards the pendulum golem, the most unique enemy he had ever met, he still had the necessary respect in his heart. Anyone who had their own beliefs should at least be respected. The dear demoness fixed the pendulum golem's body and placed it on her back. Her movements were gentle, as if she was afraid that she would hurt her companion. However, the cumbersome pendulum golem was much heavier than her, so it looked somewhat comical, but at this moment, no one was laughing. However, as the two of them moved, Brando discovered a problem. He realized that the golden battle flag could not be taken away. It turned out that this treasure had been inserted into the ground as soon as it entered the arena, forming an area similar to that of a treasure barrier. Within this area, all treasures and cards would be upgraded by one tier. However, this area was fixed, about 1 kilometer in radius, and could not be moved. This was a little awkward. Brando tried to think of a way to remove the golden battle flag, but to no avail. In the end, it was the dear demoness who reminded him that this treasure barrier had two uses. One was to attach to something, and only worked on that thing. The other was to attach to the arena, and only worked on a certain area. The golden battle flag was obviously the latter. In this case, it could only wait for the reset phase to be shuffled back into the deck for the next use. Brando was a little helpless, but also relieved. The amber sword never had an item that was so strong that it couldn't be countered. Presumably, it was the same for the cards of fate. Moreover, the dear Banshee had said that planeswalkers weren't invincible. There were people in the real world who could rival them. This showed that the power of the cards of fate wasn't limitless. In fact, Brando had already discovered that the cards of fate had many restrictions. There were requirements to enter the arena, and there were limitations to mana. Moreover, Irene also told him that the land of a planeswalker was not unlimited. The capacity of the land was closely related to the strength of the planeswalker. She told Brando that he would understand this point when he became an official planeswalker. Therefore, after discovering the limitations of the golden battle flag, Brando felt relieved. This was because compared to the limitations of other cards, this was the strength of the secret cards. Although the dear demoness was not a planeswalker herself, she had a lot of knowledge about planeswalkers. She told Brando that because of the power of the golden battle flag, it could become the core card of his deck. In this case, he needed to find a way to filter cards so that he could be the first to grab the golden battle flag from the deck in every battle. For example, she said that generally speaking, there were two ways to grab cards. The first way was to grab more cards to increase the chances of getting a specific card, such as her mind acceleration barrier. The other way was to filter a specific card from the deck, such as selecting a creature card from the deck and shuffling the hand, or selecting a treasure card from the deck and absorbing it into the hand. Irene thought for a moment and told Brando that the Pendulum Golem's core card in the Dark Realm of Adversity, the Impasse Trojan Horse, was such a card. However, it was used to filter the creature cards, and its effect was stronger than the average filter card. But the dear Demoness did not say how strong it was. Brando looked at her, and she said, "Both the Pendulum Golem and I have recognized you as the inheritor of the Paradise of Adversity. Therefore, this core card will be given to you sooner or later, so allow me to keep you in suspense." For Irene to say such words, it meant that she had at least slightly recovered from her previous sadness. Brando also let out a sigh of relief. While the two were talking, they entered a small natural cave that had not been artificially carved. There was a nest here that looked like an underground wind tunnel, and it was a typical water cave. This area was called the Maze of Einar by the people of Cruz. Einar was a monster with goat ears. According to legend, it was the servant of the goddess of earth, and it enjoyed building mazes. However, even the most complicated place would lose its mystery after thousands of years of exploration. Irene led Brando through the long cave as if she was taking a stroll in her own backyard. Then, the two entered a man-made tunnel at the end of the cave. This tunnel had a staircase that led downwards. At the bottom of the staircase, a large cave appeared. As soon as Brando entered the cave, he was stunned by the scene in front of him. He saw that the walls of the cave were made of endless crystals, and inside the crystals were 3 people. The first person Brendel saw was the planeswalker Kelsey. He was an old man, and his attire was no different from that of a normal magus. Although he still maintained his appearance when he was alive, his skin was gray and his muscles were sagging. Wrinkles drooped down as if they had lost their vitality, as if the hidden injuries in his body had exhausted all of his life force, and he was on the verge of death. But even with such an old appearance, one could still feel the immense power in his withered body. Brando did not know that this old man was Kelsey, but for some reason, when he saw him, he felt as if he was facing the whole world. When he looked at the expression of the dear Demoness beside him, he completely understood what was going on. "This is your master." The dear Demoness nodded. She put down the remains of the pendulum golem and silently placed it beside the crystal. This time, she did not cry. At this moment, Brando suddenly realized that there seemed to be a layer of veins floating on the crystal wall. He was shocked, but after a closer look, he realized that it was indeed so. He suddenly raised his head and saw that the veins on the crystal wall were connected to the ceiling of the cave. Brando immediately realized that the ceiling of the cave was also covered in mysterious runes made of mithril. It was similar to the spell formation on the ground outside. He was slightly stunned. At first, he did not understand why this was done. But suddenly, he sucked in a breath of cold air. This was because the light on the crystal was clearly being maintained by drawing on the energy of the 3 people inside. Martha above, the 3 people in the crystal must have been sealed here willingly. What kind of power could make such powerful beings give up their lives to guard this place forever? His throat was dry, and he could not help but touch the crystal with his hand. He then turned his gaze to the second person. This was a middle-aged swordsman. His face was chiseled, and he looked resolute and powerful. Even with his eyes closed, he gave off an imposing aura. He could not help but ask, "Who is this?" "This is the most outstanding swordsman I have ever seen. He is the leader of the natives of this place." The dear Demoness looked at the middle-aged swordsman with respect. Brando then looked at the third person. With just one glance, he could not look away. He had never seen such a beautiful scene. The girl sealed in the crystal was like a goddess from the legends. She wore a pure white silk dress. This style of dress was very rare nowadays. It looked like the white robes of the ancient Greek cities, but with many layers. It had a modern style. The long dress was embedded in the crystal, and it bloomed like a pure white lotus flower as if it was blown by the wind. Time stopped at this moment. The girl's eyes were closed. She looked at most 17 or 18 years old. Her long hair was completely stretched out in all directions. It was white, so were her eyelashes and skin. It was like an ice crystal without a trace of blood. Her whole person and her white dress formed a unique scene. Brando had never seen such a beautiful woman, especially with that kind of temperament. "Is she dead?" he could not help but ask. The dear demoness nodded. Brando knew that he had asked a stupid question. The three people in the crystal obviously came from the same era. She had been sleeping here with them for thousands of years. But he did not know why. When he saw this woman, he felt that something was wrong. He suddenly felt a subtle feeling. It should be said that it was familiar. He did not understand why he had this feeling. He could swear that no matter which world he was in, he had definitely seen or even heard of such a scene. Such a beautiful woman, Brando believed that if he had seen her once, he would definitely have an impression of her. But at this time, the first thing that appeared in his mind was Aunt Jenny, then the little Roman, and finally Baba Shaw. That old and ugly woman. Brando was shocked. He suddenly understood and blurted out, "Witch." He remembered who this girl was. The Queen of Ice, the first witch king before the golden age of witches. There was a deep resonance from the crystal. This sound went straight to the ground, as if it was responding to something. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.